I'm Yoon. I'm the president and co-founder of the Korean American Community Foundation. And I have to say, it is so good to see all of you in person here. It's been a really long few years, and I think I was just talking with some friends yesterday and saying how, Zoom, like it was necessary and it's a good way to kind of keep us sustained and connected and able to get work done that we needed to do. But it's not a good place to build new friendships or to really to build. And I think that something like today, where we are together, that we are connecting each other, I've been able to hug many of you, and it just feels exceptionally precious and dear to me. And as I look around this room and see so many old friends and new friends from close by, but also from far away, I just want to thank you so much for being with us this morning. It made me reflect how on a Saturday morning when I was growing up, there was always let's get going so that we can go do SAT prep, or we're gonna get into the best college, and we're gonna get a good job, and we're gonna get 자리 잡혀, in America, right? But the fact that so many of you are here on a Saturday morning, and actually a beautiful Saturday, to talk about giving and how we can give. It is so moving to me that we are able to gather as Korean and Asian Americans to really explore what does that mean. Because I think all of us recognize as immigrants or as children of immigrants that we are here, each of us, right now, in your seat, where you are, because somebody sacrificed for us. And we are given so much. We have been given education, language, and tools to be able to navigate American society and corporate culture in ways that maybe the first generation, did not have. But for us then, it really makes us think about what does it mean now that we're not worried about just surviving in this country. We are really able to think more broadly and more expansively about not surviving, but thriving. And that does include not just getting, but giving. And giving in a way that doesn't have to be like traditional ways that philanthropy has been structured in this country, and some of the same power dynamics, let's say, and we'll be digging into some of that today, but we can reimagine philanthropy. And what does that mean? And so today we're so privileged to have a number of speakers or thought leaders who will provoke us to think differently. And for KACF, the Korean American Community Foundation, we wanted to set that table so that we could begin to have those conversations and to encourage and explore and really celebrate giving in many, many forms, not just the traditional kind of like pulling out a checkbook, or I don't know if young people you don't even use checkbooks anymore, so I'm like totally dating myself. So I would say KACF was founded 20 years ago, and in the fall of 2002, I was privileged to be a part of a small group of Korean Americans who gathered to think about what are sort of the funding gaps in our community. There are so many good grassroots and other more mature organizations that are in the front lines of serving and actually being the safety net for our community. And yet, so many of these organizations were pretty invisible to funders and foundations. And so we really thought about what can we do as Korean Americans to start exercising our philanthropic muscle. And as we all know, that a muscle doesn't grow overnight. It takes steadfastness and a little bit of exercising. And that's what we have been doing for our community for 20 years. And I remember, in 2002 was the idea, the fall. By 2003, we had raised the founders with our own giving, and we were all kind of doing okay, but none of us was like Bill Gates or anything. But we asked family and friends, and we raised $60,000 in our first year, 2003, and we gave out 5 grants of about $12,000 each. And I'm really proud to say that to date, we have given out more than $10 million in grants to Asian American Korean nonprofits. And at the end of this year, we are poised to add an additional $2 million to that total. So this is something that we realize that you don't go from 60,000 in 2003 to 2 million in 2022 overnight. That is that exercising of that muscle. And I just really want to say, when I look around this room, that number and all the work that is being done too, it is represented in many, many of you who are in this room. And I hope that, I don't know where I'm going to be in 20 years, but 20 years from now, that some of you, especially young people who are in the room, that you will be able to look back and say, that number, that was nothing, That was like, and I have to say also, just yesterday, I was able to have to meet with a number of Korean American leaders in the nonprofit and foundation space, and it was so moving to see like the great work. I mean, so humbling really to see how much wonderful work around the country that that is being done, and also exciting to see what we can do potentially as we collaborate more together. So today, we are talking about reimagining philanthropy, how to think outside of the box and innovate, maybe new and different ways to make a meaningful impact in our community. And before I introduce our speakers for the plenary, I'd like to thank our incredibly generous sponsors, and they are Samsung, Lloyd A. Fry Foundation, Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund, Marin Community Foundation, McKnight Foundation, Siegel Family Endowment, and the Wallace Foundation. And all of these organizations or foundations are represented, you should know this, by Korean American philanthropic leaders who are working to create a positive and sustainable change for immigrant and marginalized communities. So I want to give them a round of applause. Oops. And today we'll be having a conversation with 2 of these leaders. Cathy Cha is the president and CEO of the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund, and Rhea, president and CEO of the Marin Community Foundation. First about Cathy, under her leadership, the Haas Jr. Fund is pursuing new ways to advance equity and justice so that every person has opportunities to thrive and live a life with dignity and hope. And her path-breaking approach to collaboration among funders and nonprofits and government has helped to spark wide-ranging social impact, including California's leadership among states in adopting pro-immigrant policies. And Rhea joined the Marin Community Foundation in 2021, right in the middle of a pandemic, one of the largest foundations in the country. MCF partners with over 520 individuals and families in their philanthropic endeavors. And annually, they distribute more than $150 million to address critical needs locally, nationally, and globally. And previously, Rhea served as the president of NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, and was the assistant secretary for policy management and budget at the U.S. Department of the Interior. So following our dialogue, we're going to have time for Q&A, and so please make sure that you've downloaded the Whova app if you haven't done so already, so that you can submit questions using the app. We'll also have an option for people to ask questions using a good old-fashioned microphone as well. So please join me in giving these 2 incredible leaders, Rhea and Cathy, a warm welcome. I have to say, they're both from California, and
Yay,
so
California.
This is kind of early for them still, and they also like personally arm wrestled with like some 5K runners to get here on time this morning. I know many of you had to do the same. So I just really want to thank you for making time and just your presence here this morning. Yeah.
You're so welcome, but I have to admit that I still kind of think of myself as a New Yorker because I only left a couple of years ago, and so I'm like, I know this town, I like know how to get places, and I got a cab or whatever, and I ended up completely going in the opposite direction. Got totally lost. I was like, I'm so ashamed. Not a New Yorker
You're a tourist
anymore.
now.
A tourist now. My God.
But I think for many of us, because we've all been kind of holed up, for a long time, and so I found myself also like even just looking for the building and trying to deal with the streets. I think many of us are kind of still in a bit of a haze. But I want to start by saying, both of you, you're from California, so you're a New Yorker. Once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker. But actually, it must be a place where you are more used to, in some ways, of being a part of bigger populations of Asian Americans, and being with fellow, mostly Korean Americans, but also, this is the only conference of its kind that really brings together Asian Americans around the topic of giving. It'd be really great to just hear from each of you a little bit about your personal journey and what it means to be a leader in philanthropy as a leader of color, as a Korean American. Cathy, do you want to start?
Sure. 안녕하세요. It's really great to be here, and very special for me to be in a room of Koreans and friends, so thank you. First of all, I just want to thank you, Kyung, and thank the board and the staff of KACF. It is incredible that we have a 20-year-old Korean American Community Foundation in this country. And I just appreciate the foresight and the vision from 20 years ago. And I said jokingly to Kyung a couple of weeks ago, if we didn't have KACF, a few of us would be getting together right now wondering how to create a community foundation. So an incredible, incredible history. So thank you. So my personal story, I think, is a pretty familiar Korean American story for folks that are here. My father came to the US in the mid-60s, right after immigration laws started easing up for Asians. And he grew up on the family rice farm in Busan. And actually, came and he had about $100 of money that family had given him, his life savings, got on his first plane trip to the US to come to graduate school. And fast forward, he ended up becoming a professor. And so in a lot of ways, my family has lived the miraculous American dream. And came here for opportunity, and that's why I feel a connection to the Mexicans and the Africans and the Indians and people from all over the world that are trying to come to the US with that same dream of opportunity. And so for me, my parents were able to put my brother and I through school, and we have successful careers now. But I try not to forget my history, right? And our history as a colonized, war-torn country. And we know what it's like to be marginalized, to be invisible, to be oppressed, to have our culture crushed, to have our country blown to pieces. And as successful as we become, I hope we don't forget that, because that is deep, deep within us. And it's part of who we are, and that resilience and that strength is part of us. And so, and then maybe the last quick thing I'll say about my family story is my parents, because they were early immigrants to the US and because my father was a professor, they were always community leaders. And so like all the graduate students who left family at home and didn't have any place to go for the holidays would all be at my house, right? And my brother and I, we always thought we had like 25 uncles because everybody was an ajashi and everybody was an ajima. And the way my parents translated that to me is, these are your aunts and your uncles, and this is your family. And so we are bound together in this really profound way. And I will say that I feel like that extended family that we have, that community of giving, and my mom now, anybody who is sick at her church, she still makes a pot of soup to take over, right? And so she gives in that way because we think of community expansively. This is not, oh, are you a blood relative? No, you are Korean. And so that is not just my family. That tradition of who we are and how we are bound together is just deeply Korean. And I'll just end with that example from last week and the crisis, the tragedy in Itaewon. That hit me hard, right? It hit all of us hard. I didn't know anybody who died that day, but I could identify in such a deep way. What if that was me trying to redial my kid's cell phone number? What if that was me wondering about my cousin? What if that had been one of us? And so we are so bound together as a community. We are bound together. And in positive ways too. Like I stroll into my hotel room and I'm like, oh, that's a Samsung screen, all right, right? And we're proud about BTS and about K-beauty and about all of our strengths. This week also, Ryan Park, one of the people that's arguing the affirmative action case in front of the Supreme Court, is a Korean. And for me, I don't know Ryan Park. I'd actually never heard of him before this week, but I was proud, right? And so all of us, we are bound together in this really beautiful way. And so that is not just my family, that's how we roll.
It's always very hard to follow Cathy. And I'll just say one other thing about Cathy. When she was remarking that if you all didn't have the foresight 20 years ago to kind of create KACF, there'd be people talking about it. And there's no question that this woman would be the leader of the group. She has absolutely...
I'd call you first.
No, she's absolutely been such a pioneer, in particular for the Asian American community, but also for all of the communities that feel unmainstreamed, if you will. And so I just am really honored to be in her presence and to be a colleague of hers. And it is really wonderful to be here. It's super exciting to be back in New York. It's super exciting to be speaking to this organization. My cousin David is on the board, and I'm so grateful and proud to be associated with this organization, and excited for the day that you have ahead of you. So, Kyung, you started your question by talking about how we're both from California and we're coming here, and it may be more, I don't know, more easy in a way to be in California with a lot of other Asian Americans and a lot of other immigrant or people of color groups. And what's fascinating about that is that I moved to Marin County, which is just north of the Golden Gate Bridge, and I have not lived in as white a community as I had when I was growing up. And I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which was a fairly white community, and similar to Cathy, my father and mother were immigrants during the late 60s. My father got a job at the University of Colorado, ended up becoming a professor there, and that's how I ended up becoming born in Boulder. But Boulder and Marin are very similar, very beautiful places, lots of outdoor activities, fairly wealthy, and very, very, very white. So I spent, honestly, the last couple of years kind of gnashing my teeth. I'm like, I cannot believe I am this old and I literally can't find a Korean grocery store within 10 minutes from me. Like I have to drive all the way to South San Francisco to go to a Korean grocery store. And I'm like, when I grew up, I really was like, I am never gonna live like this again. I'm never going to be in a place where I feel so different. And frankly, so ostracized. I mean, we grew up really as one of the only Asian American families in the entire community, and had a very, very significant amount of racism and trauma because of that. And so it's just interesting that fast forward, I kind of get to this place in my life. But fast forward, we're kind of at this place in our lives, and I feel so grateful for the experience and the privilege that I've had throughout my career. And in particular, very, very lucky to be at a community foundation where I can actually be in proximity to the needs and the opportunities, the problems and the solutions, the people and the heroes that actually will be leading this work and have always, frankly, led this work. I feel so lucky to be on the ground, and even in a place like Marin, and perhaps particularly in a place like Marin that is so overshadowed by its wealth and its beauty and abundance. The reality is it's the home of two of the most segregated neighborhoods in the entire state of California. Deep, deep pockets of historic inequity, particularly for African Americans and for Latinos. Even though Asian Americans are the second largest minority population group, completely invisible. And so kind of being at this stage of my career and really being able to really think about that and bring race forward more as an issue that frankly has always mattered is something that is incredibly exciting to me and challenging, because race is probably as challenging as it ever has been. But I feel incredibly, frankly, optimistic about it in a weird sort of way. I mean, despite all of the terribleness that we see every single day, and if it's not one thing, it's another every week. I think even because of it, or in reaction to it, we're also seeing so much more of a conversation and an awareness and an understanding of the reality of what race matters, what race means in this country, what it's always meant. And I think that's exciting, actually. I think that's a real positive thing.
Thank you. And, thank you also for, sharing about your own experiences, right, of feeling othered or being discriminated as you were growing up, and also what Cathy raised, more of the macro issues around our history, as Koreans and Korean Americans. I think all of that is so significant in the sense that, for those of you who are in New York, like the KACF Gala, every year, it's kind of taken on a kind of its own, and so like I will once a year find myself standing in a ballroom, wearing a nice dress and looking out, and there's like 1,000 people in black tie, and I one year I said to the audience, like, tonight it's us, like in ball gowns and tuxedos, raising money for a good cause. Last night there were a similar group of people, like in black tie, and tomorrow night it'll be another group. What makes us unique tonight? And I really thought that for, this beautiful and cleaned up, group of people, most of us at least, know someone who couldn't get a job because of lack of English proficiency. Like we might, it might have been our own parents, or maybe they were professors, but I tell you, like among the, ajumma and ajashis that were in our lives, and, and perhaps, we all know somebody, who experienced that, or we ourselves might have experienced what it means to be an interpreter for our parents, and to deal with like, the gas company or whatever, because we're the ones, at a young age. I bring that up because I feel like so I'm privileged, I guess, in a way that I'm actually Korean American and I'm working in the Korean community. But you guys, you are, your foundations are very lucky to have you at the helm, and with your own lived experiences and that kind of empathy. And so it's not just about just fellow Koreans, but you bring that empathy. And I think, Cathy, you were talking about that, how whether, about why immigrant issues matter to you. And so maybe you could just speak on how that has shown up in your work or your leadership.
Yeah, happy to. So I think we're in a situation where we have to think about Koreans for sure. That's who we are. And now in 2022 and beyond, we're in a position where we can be more magnanimous and we can think more broadly about everybody. And we are so now deeply rooted in this country that we have some opportunity to figure out how to strengthen this country too. So I really feel like this is our time. And I will tell you, like with my parents' generation, I feel like in a lot of ways, they paved the path, right? So this is for you all, either your parents or your grandparents. Looking around the room and seeing how many younger people there are, it could be your grandparents, that took that risk, that got on that plane, that started all over in a new country that honestly was not very welcoming to them. And they felt the sting of racism every day of the week as they were trying to be here. And there was no H Mart then, right? Like this is like, they are, there was no BTS. It was not, being Korean was not cool in the mid-60s, And so they were really at the bottom in terms of the way they were seen. And so they're survivors. They were the path breakers. And then it's my generation, Rhea and my, Gen X, and we had that consciousness of their sacrifice. Just my brother and I, that was heavy on our minds. How do we help the family? How do we finish school as quickly as possible without debt? We were just grinding and working. And so we're this striver, this Gen X KA striver generation. And now I look at all of you, and especially the young people, the 40 and under that are in this crowd, you all can dream now. There's so many more possibilities because so many paths have been paved, Rhea paving paths in the environmental movement, in government, et cetera. And now you could be a speed skater, an archer, there's so many things where the paths have been paved. And so I feel like this is an incredible time for Korean Americans. We have felt the marginalized, we know what it's like to be poor, marginalized. We felt the sting of racism. And now we are looking at this country and trying to figure out how can we make this country the multiracial democracy that we have dreamed of. And now we've got the talent, we understand these systems, we are well educated, we're moving up, and it is up to us to help shape that vision of this country. We are not bystanders. My parents still, they've been in this country for 50 years, and they still feel like foreigners here, right? They don't feel like it's up to them to say, this is what affordable housing policy in my town should look like, or this is what education, they don't feel like that. But you all who are born here, me, I feel like this is, I got a say in that. I got a few ideas about that. And so this is our collective time. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the high stakes elections on Tuesday. So, part of having power and influence on educational policy in your community, you gotta vote. And we gotta get our people to vote. And you know what though, the reality is, we're never gonna have the numbers of like the Mexican community. So if we're just holed off over here, a couple million people, we will, be a couple million loud people. But we gotta figure out what our common bonds are with other communities. And I'll say curriculum and a fair shot at education and what our children are being taught in the schools is a great example. We could come out and say, hey, we would like the Korean story to be told more accurately. What is the Korean narrative that is being taught in the history books? What does it say about Japan? What does it say about those contested islands? What does it say about comfort women, et cetera? We could go there, but we would be a lot more effective if we went there with the Chinese, with the Latinos, with the blacks, and with Native Americans saying, we want together a history that represents all of us more effectively. And so part of it is, this is what this country needs in terms of values. We had to link arms to say what is going to lift everybody up. But the second part of it is just efficacy. We are going to be more successful if we link arms, build alliances, and join together for the common goals that change all of us. So I just want to take that racism that we have experienced, and this is what I mean. I don't want us to go from white and privileged society to Korean and privileged society. We have to remember where we're from, and we got to work for everybody. And we can't say, oh, I can't remember what racism was like. I can't remember what it was like to be poor. I can't remember what it was like to be hungry. If we do that, we're missing some strength in our communities and missing a big part of our history and our culture. And so it's something that when I was little, I was ashamed of. Like, I didn't have the nicest tennis shoes. I never had a pair of Nikes growing up, right? But now I see it as an incredible source of strength in our history. I'm proud of my parents and their struggle and what we've been to. And so we should be leaning into that, and we should be connecting with other communities so we can make this country stronger.
Thank you. Rhea, I know it's hard, but you got to follow Cathy.
Can we shake this up a little? Like, let's, yeah. So I guess I wanted to pick up on a point that you landed on, because it makes me think about the recent incidences in the last month or so in LA with the LA City Council and the secret recording that really kind of illustrated the reality kind of behind the scenes of the kind of the active racism that still exists in so many of our communities. And you know, California is actually kind of put up as a bit of a model, in particular for the coalition of people of color working together to create a significant political bloc, both in the state as well as in a variety of different municipalities. And I think that recording, as disturbing as it was, really, I think, laid bare the reality of how fragile these kinds of coalitions are, and really did, in some cases, call into question, right, the reality of the nature of these coalitions. But I guess I want to say a couple things that just absolutely underscore what Cathy said. We absolutely do need to continue to stick together as a community, but we can't do this alone, and we never have in this country in particular. And as we see so many things going on, people, communities, groups being picked off, you know, whatever, 2 years ago it was African Americans, last week it was the Jewish community. I mean, we can sit there and just wait until it's our turn, because make no mistake about it, it will be our turn. Or we can collectively organize together and say, this is not the America that we signed up for, and this is not the America that is America. And I think that's frankly what's happening now. So I'm really interested in understanding where organizations like KACF go in the future, because it's not just about looking within and recognizing the issues and the needs and the opportunities for within. It's also outside. It's also the external, and how you begin to build those bridges, because those bridges are needed more than ever. And frankly, it was those bridges that really helped uplift and create the civil rights movement in the 1960s. That was obviously a movement very much focused on African American rights, but it was all Americans that really showed up and said, this is absolutely the right thing. These are our ethics, and these are our morals, and these are our values as a country. And I think we need to do the same thing now in, again, these very, very pressing times.
Thank you. And, you know, given those sort of insights for this audience, as we're kind of thinking, and especially for many of the young people who may be just charting kind of their giving journey going forward, like Do you have any insights, and Rhea, we could start with you, around philanthropy that you would like to share with this audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this isn't my first rodeo in philanthropy. So when I was younger, I had 2 jobs working for 2 very large family foundations, the Hewlett Foundation and then the Packard Foundation. They're really very, very large institutional foundations at this point, but it got me a sense of kind of what it's like to basically not have to raise money. These were very, very well endowed organizations. I, had just the complete honor and privilege of being able to, be paid fairly well to give somebody else's money away to things that I really cared about. That's like a great opportunity. And so kind of moving into the community foundation space where we do have an obligation to try to stimulate philanthropy for the community issues that we care about. It's a really wonderful way for me to think about philanthropy in a different sort of light. And what I mean by that is, I think in particular because of just the huge wealth inequality that's incurred over the last 20 years, we think of philanthropists or philanthropy as, those people that are written up in Fortune magazine and have their jets and fancy boats and whatever, and they can, give checks of $100 million, no problem. I actually think that isn't philanthropy. The reality of philanthropy in this country in particular, and in general, is it has always been the case that lower income people give a much higher percentage of their overall annual income to charity, whether it's their church or whether it's a local community-based organization. I mean, it just has always been the case for communities, in particular communities of color. And so I really would hope that you think about wherever it is in your career that philanthropy is not something you do when you make it, but it's something that you do every single day that is part of how you succeed, frankly, how you should, frankly, be thinking about success. Success should always be giving back in whatever way, form you have, whether it's through gifts, and even if they're, if you want to say modest gifts, it's not just gifts, it's your time and your talent, right? So the time, talent, treasure thing, there's so much need, there's so much opportunity, and the groups that KACF supports, I think, illustrate the opportunity right here in the broader New York area. But really, there's just so much opportunity. So please don't wait. And I will tell you for a fact, I know a lot of people that had in their mindsets, and perhaps it's more of a kind of our generational thing, that once I make it big, then I'll retire and then I'll start to do the good work. Then I'll start to do the work that feeds my soul. And I tell you, I've seen a lot of examples of this. It's too late. By the time you get to that point, it's too late. You can feed your soul now, and it's meaningful, again, regardless of whatever income level, because it's always been meaningful. So,
yeah, that's such a good point. And I'll add 2 dimensions to what Rhea said, because that is spot on. One thing I would say is I'm really hopeful about the Gen Y, Gen Z, younger generations, and the way they think about giving, and the way they think about living a values-driven life. And so for the boomers, I would say you could work at Chevron during the daytime and then give to an environmental group at night. And you would not think of that as incongruent or, that conflict. You just do it. I don't think the 40 and under crowd can do that. They want to live their values consistently. And I'm really inspired by this, by you all. So if you have environmental values and you're concerned about climate and the way this world is going, you don't work at Chevron. You find a job that's consistent with your values. You sign petitions you volunteer, you give. It's even the kind of straw you use, right? And so that you want that to show up in every aspect of your life. And I think that's something that us, the older generation, can really learn from. So I'm very inspired by that. Second, I will tell you, especially sitting in San Francisco, that giving and community leadership is now part of the modern day definition of what being successful in America looks like. And what I mean by that is Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, he started a very big, he started giving and started a big family foundation. And, I'm not so sure it's because he's got such a big beating heart and wants to do that. He's doing that because there's an expectation that he does that. It's not enough now just to quietly build a rocket and buy a winery. People are expecting him as a wealthy leader to have community work and to give. And so I really think what's happening now, again, values, work, wealth, all intertwined, and giving is right there. An expectation of giving is right there as you think about, what does it mean to make it in American society? And so I think Rhea's advice is really good. It's like, start feeding your soul at an earlier time. And it is super rewarding. This is not you giving away. I hear this from donors all the time. Oh my gosh, the act of giving, I get more than the recipient. You hear that all the time. I've learned more. I feel so great. It's a beautiful thing. It's not a chore. It's a beautiful thing.
Great. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing? I just was thinking about the reality of how I grew up as a first-gen child of immigrants and in a very white community and very much purposefully tried to be invisible, right? Like, don't make a lot of noise, don't stir up a lot of trouble, keep quiet. And I feel like my counterparts in Korea, the same generation, actually grew up in a very, very different world where demonstrations and protests were much more a part of kind of their lives and civic engagement. And so I'm hoping that this next gen of you all, mostly here in this or in this group, do think of your roles in society, in American societies, as in slightly different ways than at least I did growing up, right? And really feeling like it is your responsibility, actually, to go out and do that demonstration or do that protest, and God knows there's a lot of them to do these days, but to not feel scared, but to feel, again, a degree of agency and an opportunity around it. I guess I would really encourage you to root that here, because it's rooted back home. It needs to be rooted here as well.
I would love to build on that, because I'm so glad you brought that up. That is so deeply Korean, right? We would not have a democracy in Korea had there not been multiple generations. And I love actually seeing the protests. Well, first of all, the protests are all so tidy and like the signs are so cute. But it's a harmony with a baby in a stroller. This is not, the radical fringe of Korean society. So there is something about speaking out and something about justice and something about for the people, of the people, that is deep in our culture. Deep, deep, deep in our culture. And I wouldn't say this to every Asian audience that I speak in front of, but for Koreans, these things, communal thinking, caring for one another, being bound, speaking up, having voice and protests and some defiance, that is Korean. And I'm so glad you brought this up, because we shouldn't try to suppress that and be the quiet Asians in America. We should be ourselves, and we should bring what's fully Korean to this country, because this country is going to be stronger for it.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on one thing of what you said about just about incorporating giving, as a practice, and we talked about the muscle and just kind of starting, early. At the same time, and we should be giving like what gives us joy. But in our work with the Korean American Community Foundation, what we see a lot is that once you graduate from your alma mater, like you start getting hit on by your college, to give, and you start to engage that way, and you should, absolutely, you should. I mean, this is good. And if you love the opera and you love arts and culture, totally. Like, I mean, it's your, it is what gives you joy. And if you were, good heavens, if you're affected by cancer and you want to give to, to hospitals or to, this is all good. The part about giving to your own community, and sometimes I find with Korean Americans that we are so into the mainstream being where we want to be visible or where we want to, and kind of our own community sometimes buying into, I think, the model minority stereotype that there are not, that we don't have needs. How do we show up ourselves in terms of being champions and givers to, and I'm not saying that that's all you do, that's all but if each of us kind of, pull together and collectively help to raise up our community and to strengthen and empower. I just would love to get that insight from you.
So I think it's, I'll just go back to the time, talent, and treasure, right? I think there's a variety of different ways to think about philanthropy, to think about giving, to think about being part of a community and your responsibility associated with that. And so whether it's you volunteer, or whether it's you go to, even if you go to the gala once a year, but having something that kind of is more routinized, if you will, that's not something that's just, an episodic, but it's just part of how you carry yourself in kind of the world and how you kind of think of your daily life. I guess I would just encourage people to really think about incorporating this plank of what's my responsibility, not just as a Korean American, but as a community member here in New York, or a community member here in this country. What's my responsibility today towards my fellow kind of residents and citizens, and how do I give back, or how do I even show up in a way that really demonstrates the true power that I think we all have as individuals? But it is not, again, I just really want to emphasize, this is not something that needs to be overly complex or overly wrought. It's actually a very, very easy thing to kind of think about, because I guarantee you everybody here probably has something that they really, really care about, and it's not like you are forcing yourself to think about it. You're thinking about it all the time. So how do you just lean into that for more and put some action around it in whatever way it might make sense for you?
I think what I might add, and since it's a friends and family crowd, I'm going to say something a little tougher, which is I think that kind of giving to your alma mater, to the art museum, et cetera, is a very white way of giving. And so it is, this is what we think success looks like in the US. I want my name on this list with all these white donors in town. And what I want to challenge everybody, and I want the younger generation to lead on this, if we leaned into our Koreanness, what would that giving look like? And so what I mean by the whiteness, there's just, and I live this, right, as a person who's over 50 now, it's a shame, right? There wasn't a place. I want to be at the country club with all the white people and et cetera. And now what I think we need to be open and less shameful about are the needs in our communities. And so I'll give you an example, DACA. Almost 1 out of 6 Koreans are undocumented. So it's a quiet shame, and there's a lot of documented kids who have DACA in our communities, right? But we've been in this place where, we don't talk about that. We don't want to be outward. We don't want to talk about the poverty in our community or the seniors that are alone and hungry. We don't want to talk about that. And I just want us to say, look, we are now in a place where we are strong enough and we are successful, collectively successful enough, that we can be more open with our community challenges, and we can not do a white model of giving to the opera, et cetera. We can do some Korean community giving in addition. And it looks different, and it's a different path. And it is about propping us up. All those ajishis and ajumas, we are bound together as a broader community. That is not them over there in Itaewon, or that senior in Flushing that is wondering what she's going to have for dinner tonight. That is us. That is our extended community. And I just think it's time to not whisper about it anymore. And for the 40 and under to be open, to say we have problems too, but we are solving these problems together.
Thank you. I know that I'm just trying to get a time check. So I have 1 minute. Okay, I have 1 minute. Oh no, we can take one question. Okay, we can take a one-minute question from the audience. And I don't see. I was checking whether there's anything through our Whova. But would anyone like to ask a question? Oh, Jeannie?
Hi, I was just wondering, so many of us, of course, have been brought up with this imperative to gain financial security for our families, to bring our families out of the precarity of an immigrant's life. And so I wonder, some here may even be thinking like, oh, maybe I can accumulate the wealth someday to have my own family foundation. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that idea of endowments, because I know there's also a lot of discussion that maybe like taking a big chunk of money and basically setting it aside is actually not the best way to do philanthropy or to be helpful.
This is your question. It's right down Rhea's lane.
So it's such a good question. I mean, the field of philanthropy is changing a lot, and I just loved what Cathy said. I mean, philanthropy really was built along kind of the whole, robber baron era of incredible wealth, and
The Rockefellers, the Fords, the
Carnegies,
Carnegies, they're all here in town within 2 miles.
Right, and now we're kind of seeing it emulated with the kind of titans of Silicon Valley, even though those guys are basically not giving their money away. But this idea that you're amassing a bunch of wealth, you're creating a big foundation, you're either putting it into a private foundation with an endowment that is only forced to spin out 5% a year, or you're turning it into something called a donor-advised fund that organizations like mine have, which frankly doesn't even have an expiration date. Like, you can just stick $10 million in and you never have to give it away, even though you immediately get the tax credit for doing so. So it's this real tension right now in the philanthropic community of is that giving, or is that a tax shelter, right? And frankly, the truth of a lot of philanthropy is that it is motivated by a tax incentive, and some people are taking advantage of that tax incentive in ways that aren't truly philanthropic. And so I not only think that it's important to shine a big spotlight on that, but I also think it's important to, and I'm actually hoping that they'll shine more of a spotlight on community foundations, because most community foundations aren't the ones that are sitting with Elon Musk's LLC. We aren't that, right? They're rich enough that they're creating their own private family offices, and they don't have to share any information about anything with anyone. For community foundations, not things like Fidelity or Vanguard, which also have these vehicles called DAFs, community foundations, I feel like are really the kind of centralized repository of the democratization of philanthropy, of the true opportunity of what philanthropy should look like in communities, where it's not the $100 million donor, but it's the middle-aged couple that have an extra $100,000 that they want to use in whatever way to give back to their community. They put that into a donor-advised fund, and I guarantee, and the rates of expenditure from our community foundation of DAFs of that size are 25 to 35% a year, right? And that's compared to the 5% that most private foundations give out. So I do think that there is a need for this kind of reimagining philanthropy from a democracy perspective, and recognizing that philanthropy actually always has been democratized, just in the way that we do, not to get the plaque or the building or whatever, but the ways that we did when we were kids and our parents had people over and everybody put money in the pot and shared it along with new immigrants that were coming in these are things that we just know, right? We didn't call them philanthropy, but we just know. So I would love to see kind of not a reimagining, but a return, right, to the reality that we actually are quite philanthropic as communities, and how do we, again, really start to re-empower that aspect of who we are and who we should be moving forward. So
yeah, let me quickly close with, GAs were the collective giving vehicle in our communities, right? So you pool money, you prop up, one family would take that whole money and it would prop them up for a business and a start. That is our history of giving, centuries and centuries. And so just challenge you all. What does that look like in the US, 2022 and beyond? We can be creative, we can be innovative, we can turn it upside down, we can do it differently. But we have these roots that are so powerful that I just want to bring to the current and to the future here.
Great. Thank you so much. And on that note, I want to thank you, Rhea and Cathy Cha, and just for a great conversation this morning as we kick off what does it mean to reimagine philanthropy and to bring our own roots and our strengths and our traditions as well as the innovative thinking. And I'm really looking forward to the day, and I just want to thank you both. Thank you.
I'm sure you will all, I'm sure you already have been and will continue to be inspired today, and as I always am from our programs, and to think about how and why you give. And I just wanted to share what I've been thinking these days about why I give, and this has sort of definitely changed over time. And the reason that I give is because I have too much. And that's something I grapple with a lot. What is too much? But what does it mean to have more than I need when so many others don't even have what they need to live lives of just basic dignity and security? And so grappling with that is hard, and that's why I'm so glad that we have days like this that help me work through that. So I'm really excited to learn from our next three speakers. We've done this before, these lightning talks, and it's always a highlight of the Giving Summit. So first, we're going to have three lightning talks from three different speakers, and then we're all going to come up together and have a Q&A session. And hopefully we'll have time for questions. I know we always run out of time at the end, but the speakers will be here and you'll be able to talk to them individually too. So you can use your Whova app. I will try to sort out questions on that, or maybe we'll do some old-fashioned questions too. Okay, so each of them is going to speak about their own giving journey. And first will be Eunice, Byun. And I'm not going to repeat the bios that are in the Whova and that you can find online, but just a quick summary. Eunice is an entrepreneur, and she's going to provide the perspective of someone who's creating a business with a giving mission. She's the co-founder and CEO of Material, which produces beautiful goods for the kitchen. And you may get a little taste of that later in your gift bag at the end of the day. So make sure, don't do it now, but check out her website at materialkitchen.com. And especially if you're a cook, I promise you're going to see things that are going to totally make you drool. So she helped plan the really fun and successful Banchan Box fundraiser that we had last year that involved Korean American chefs and food influencers. And she is originally from San Diego and says her favorite weeknight dish is doenjang-jjigae, to cook and eat. So please welcome Eunice.
Hi. Well, first, I'm so honored and humbled to be here. And as Kyung was talking this morning, I kind of feel like my story is like muscle building with a 2-pound weight. So many of you guys, I feel like, are doing these like heavy deadlifts, and I'm like, I got my little 2-pound weights in my own little company, trying to figure out how philanthropy can reimagine itself through the lens of a for-profit business. And as Jeannie said, yes, it is a kitchenware company, but I hope to share a little bit about how to us and to our team, it's so much more than just that. So one of the most common questions that you are asked when you're a child is this: what do you want to be when you grow up? So this is the participation part of my talk, okay? So by show of hands, how many of you are doing exactly what you thought you were going to be doing when you were younger? Amazing, I love it. Marie, who I know what she does, she's a writer. All right. So I'm going to take it that most of you guys then were very similar to me and had no idea what you wanted to do when you grew up. And I think for my own story and my own journey, it was very clear by my early career. So I started my career at Goldman Sachs, which I feel like, I know there are a few GS people in this room. I spent a very long 2 years there and went, I like to say, from bonds to bras. I ended up in the intimate apparel industry, where I was at Maidenform for a little bit. And then I jumped into the startup world here in New York, and I started working for other people. One of whom is Scott Galloway, if you're familiar with him and his podcasts. And then I ended up hopping over into the beauty world, leading digital for a beauty brand called Revlon. And I think what you could really tell through the early part of my career is that I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know what job, what industry. And I felt like so much of me was just searching and trying to figure out, is it a job that I'm looking for? Is it a profession? Like, is it people that I want to be doing it with? And I think it dawned on me that ultimately what I was looking for was connection. I wanted to feel more connected to the work that I was doing. I wanted to feel more connected to the people that I was doing the work with. I wanted to feel more connected to the people that I was doing the work for. And I think maybe it was right after I had my first daughter, I started thinking, well, why can't I do that? Like, why do I have to go work for someone else? Why can't I build my own company and have that actually centered on this idea of connection and community? And so let me tell you what I did first. I thought about where to begin. And for me, my parents immigrated, and the first thing that they did when they moved to America was they were restaurant owners. They were small business owners. So I grew up very much around the kitchen, around a lot of food, and just seeing how food was so central to just community building. On top of that, like so many of you guys here, our love language is food, right? So how people share love with one another is through giving food and cooking food and sharing food. Maybe our parents didn't actually say, I love you, but they put a big steaming bowl of tteokguk right in front of you. And you're like, all right, like I know that like they actually love me. Or maybe it's, growing up in the church and people being in the basement and tasting familiar flavors. And that was how community was built. And so I just thought there was so much power in this one room in the house. And how could we maybe tap into this idea of connectivity through the kitchen and start to build from there? So my good friend Dave and I, who's Vietnamese American, we decided to go out about 5 years ago and do just that. And we said, let's build something that has to do with the kitchen. Maybe we can design some really beautiful things and they can inspire joy. And we can try and build a sense of community. And that's kind of where we started. We really didn't start with something that was like, this is absolutely what we're gonna do. This is our impact mission. This is how we're gonna do something more purpose-driven. We kind of started with the notion, almost like the little sprinkling of the idea of connectivity and community. And so we started designing some things, and you'll see we do cookware, we have ceramics that are actually done in Korea. We do a lot of things in Korea because it's amazing. Our recycled plastic program, which is also made in Korea. And we started designing all these beautiful things. But I think what ultimately we recognized pretty early on was that wasn't enough. The products, sure, they got people to come and maybe look at us, but we wanted people to stay, and we wanted people to actually feel rooted in something more than just a nice direct-to-consumer kitchenware company. And so we started looking kind of inward and saying, well, what has our experience been like as Asian American founders? And I will say it is not easy being an Asian American founder, going out and trying to fundraise from investors who all look the same, and guess what? They don't look like us. And so we wanted to kind of tap into that. And so we started putting pen to paper. And I think the most important thing for us was codifying things really early on and saying, let's put what we hope to do, and let's see how we can actually bring this to life. And so I'm going to read this just because there are a lot of words on this page, but I think they're important. So based on our own experiences, we believe that transformative connections are forged And more equitable opportunities are created in the food and culinary space when diverse experiences and perspectives are seen, heard, and valued. We, as in Material, want to be a driver of positive change and commit to uplifting underrepresented voices, makers, and leaders so that we can shift and shape those spaces to work better for more people. So again, it was putting words on a piece of paper, and we needed to figure out, how do we bring this to life? What does this actually look like? How does this come to life within our company? So we thought about it through 3 lenses. How we make what we make. So that's very much thinking about the partners on the manufacturing side, getting to know them, understanding their stories, trying to understand kind of what motivates them in the work that they do, being mindful in terms of the materials that we're sourcing and ultimately our impact and the footprint that we're leaving behind. How we show up as leaders. So the way that we support our employees. We talk about our own kind of purpose-driven lives so much as a company, and we support them. So one of our employees is on the junior board of Apex, and so we were very lucky to have an Apex intern this past summer. And that was allowing one of our employees to actually bring their passion into the workplace and making sure that we can support them and show up for them. It's in the ways that we use our voice. So whether it's podcasts that we're talking on, whether it's editors that we're talking to, we really try and infuse the idea that we're more than just a kitchenware company, that ultimately we're building a platform where we can uplift kind of other underrepresented voices and shed some light on some stories that haven't been told in the food space. And then it's how we show up in communities. We try to do a lot of work on a regular basis with organizations that are kind of at the intersection of food and underrepresented and underserved communities. And so it's everything from having a product where a portion of the actual profits are being funneled directly to that organization. It's everything from like throwing the Punch-On Box party with Judy Kim, who's back there as well. She's one of the co-founders. And being able to show up for KACF and bring in as many people within kind of the food, culinary world that understand what the Korean American story is all about. And it's in the donations. I mean, I'm pretty excited that in the couple of years that our company has been around, we've been able to donate over $125,000, which has not been going to our own P&L. It's funneling right back out to organizations. And that's something that comes from our community. It's not all just from our own company. And so you'll start to see how it manifests itself in the work that we're doing. So like I said, our #1 product, which is a recycled plastic cutting board, we partnered with Heart of Dinner really early on in their journey. And what's great about this for Heart of Dinner is they know on a regular basis that they're getting a check from Material. And that is helping promote not only their own mission, but we're able to talk about that and have them join the conversation within our community so they can talk about their mission as well. We love storytelling. I know Marie's going to talk a little bit about storytelling as well. But from a brand perspective, we try and really feature different organizations that are really early on in their own journey. One that we highlighted last year is Star Route Farm. They're upstate. And what's amazing about their mission is that they're looking to donate 100% of their yield. And that is the business that they're in. They farm that land day in and day out so that they can give 100% of it away. And we work to amplify their own mission, but also help fundraise on their behalf. We also show up for other leaders. I think one of the things that I realized really early on is, as a Korean American woman, it's interesting how many editors and who wants to write about your company and how out there you are from a media perspective. And so we see our opportunity as utilizing the platform that we've built to uplift other business leaders who are doing the same thing, who are trying to build something with a little bit more purpose and a little bit more meaning. And every year, which we're just about to launch, during the holiday season where everyone is kind of Black Friday sales crazy, we launch a campaign called Kinder Kitchens, and this is going to be our 4th year doing it, where we essentially invite our community to donate a portion of their discount. And this year we're partnering with the Lower East Side Girls Club, and we're really excited about it because we can actually have a longitudinal relationship with them because they're right here in New York. And we're excited to kick off something with their entrepreneurship program, which we'll be able to do throughout the entirety of next year. Why this matters is, it's interesting. I hear this a lot sometimes from investors, and they're like, okay, well, Eunice, that's great. That's lovely. Like, we like that you're doing that. People care about this. But like, really? Is this how you want to be spending your time? And I always point back to this statistic, which is 75% of brands could simply disappear today and nobody would care. And I think what we're trying to do is say, yeah, come for the beautiful products, but the well runs so much deeper. Like, stay for what it is that we believe in. Stay for the mission that we have, the purpose that we have. And I will say, I think people do care. And how I know it is I can only point to some of the things that have been said. We were very fortunate to be selected for Oprah's Favorite Things last year, and a lot of it was rooted in the work that we're doing and being Asian founded. We have articles like Forbes writing about how we're setting a new standard for how businesses can give back to the community. And ultimately, we're just trying to build something where purpose and profits can come together. They don't have to be separated. They can actually be intentionally done. And we can really help kind of talk about that narrative and hopefully bring that to life a little bit more. So if I were to go back and tell little Eunice, what you're going to be when you grow up, I think for me, it would not be a title. It wouldn't be a job. It wouldn't be an industry. I wouldn't say, oh, you're going to be the co-founder and CEO of Material, because she'd be like, what's that? I don't know what that is. I'd say, it's so much deeper. And for me, I see my job really as a platform builder. Like, I'm just building this business that, again, is able to sustain itself through the things that we're doing. But ultimately, it's a platform that hoists up other people, other stories, other narratives, other causes. And I feel so, so fortunate in being able to do that, because not only do I love what I do, but I love being in rooms with people like you all that are doing such incredible work. And if we can play a very, very small part in helping amplify that mission and that message, I count it an honor and a blessing. So I'm so, so grateful to be here with you guys and just to be able to share a little bit of my story.
Thank you so much, Eunice. So, my family is always asking me what I want for the holidays, and I never have an answer, but I have a really good answer this year. So our next speaker is Sebastian Yoon, and Sebastian is working in philanthropy as a professional. He is a program officer with the Open Society Foundations, and his work is focused on building power for communities of color that will help shape and sustain a multiracial democracy in our country. So that's a pretty darn big goal, and you'll find that he comes to this with a very special perspective on what that will take. And if any of you saw the amazing documentary Free Chol-Soo-Lee, which premiered in New York a couple of months ago and is now streaming on Mubi.com, and I highly recommend you see it. It's a really incredible film. KACF had a special screening, and it also features my journalism mentor, K.W. Lee. Sebastian voices the words of Chol-Soo-Lee in this film and was also a collaborator on the script. And his work is really moving in it. He is from Flushing. He loves kalbitang and now lives on Long Island. And please welcome him. Thank you.
It seems a little bit unfair to go after Eunice, but I'll do my best. And I won't be providing any goodies afterwards. I'll begin by telling you a little about myself. So I grew up in Flushing, Queens with a single father and 2 siblings. And then at the age of 10, I moved to Long Island with my family, where I started to experience racism for the first time. As being one of maybe 3 Asian students in the entire school in a neighborhood that was predominantly white, I was severely bullied by my classmates and schoolmates. And I remember coming home on many occasions, hating myself, hating my Asian identity, and even at times wanting to be white, because I didn't like the idea of being different. So after a couple of years of being bullied, one day I responded with violence, something I've never done before. And I learned that it worked. Little by little, I noticed that the bullies would stop calling me names, stop putting their fingers on their eyes and stretching them out. And I felt empowered through violence. I went from being an insecure boy to someone who was feared in school because I would lash out violently at anyone who said anything wrong to me. And I took this to the streets. I started hanging out in Flushing again. And with my friends, I started getting into fights. And eventually, when I was about 15, I started hanging around with gangs in Flushing, Queens. At the age of 16, I was at a bar with my friends, almost 25 of us, and we got into a fight. And someone lost his life. As a result, I was sentenced to 15 years in prison. So from the ages of 16 to 29, I was in prison. I served 12 and a half years in total, during which I received a college education through the Barred Prison Initiative. If you want to learn more about that, you can watch a documentary called College Behind Bars. But in prison, aside from the education, I learned something. The idea of suffering and how it affects so many people beyond just myself. I listened to stories from not just Asian prisoners, but from people from different marginalized communities. And I've identified so many similarities among us. Having a single parent, their mother selling their bodies to put food on the table. Not knowing what a computer is, never having used one. Little things that we take for granted today. And then I came home feeling revitalized and wanting to change and make impact in this world, to make the place a better place, even if it's marginal. So I took a shot at philanthropy, and I applied for the Open Society Foundations at which I work today. During the COVID pandemic, I was getting a bunch of emails from my colleagues saying that they stand in solidarity with me and that they understood what I was going through and they feel my pain. And at first, it made me feel good to be around people who really felt my pain, right? To receive that kind of empathy. But as a philanthropy, I started to feel a little disillusioned that Open Society Foundations wasn't providing any substantial investments towards combating the violence against AAPIs during the height of the COVID pandemic. So as a program specialist at the time, during an all-staff meeting, I decided to speak up. I was very nervous. I didn't know where this was going to go, but I just felt the need to say something. I challenged my colleagues and leadership to really consider what we say to the world is that we promote open society values, multiracial solidarity, multiracial democracy, and yet an entire population of AAPIs are currently being attacked and feeling alone and scared, and we are not providing nothing. At the time, philanthropy was giving only 0.2% of all philanthropic giving. 0.2. That's for every $100, 2 cents was going to Asian populations in America. And we have all felt alone in this country. We know what it feels like to want to belong, to be heard. And after that conversation, my colleague Ivy and I, we drafted a proposal to get funding for the AAPI population, and we received, I won't say the amount, but it was a significant amount. And afterwards, we were able to even increase the investments towards the API populations. And it was a huge win, a huge win. But in the scheme of the whole philanthropic world, I don't feel satisfied, because money is not going to effectuate meaningful, lasting change. I believe that true change happens through narrative. The conversations that take place over the dinner table, or with your friends, or with your colleagues. I have friends, when I have conversations with them, they bring up how black people tend to be the people who attack Asian people during this COVID pandemic. I'm sure some of you have heard the same thing, right? That narrative that black people don't like APIs. It is in those moments that you need to be courageous to speak up. That does not help anyone. Blaming others, singling out a single group. I encourage you to be courageous in whatever you do. As you can see around you, we have people around us. We have support systems. We have amazing people. Philanthropy, the word, it derives from the Greek words philein and anthropos, roughly translates to the love of humanity. In philanthropy, it seems that so much discussions and ideas revolve around the idea of giving money and raising money. I think what's lost in those conversations oftentimes is the love of humanity component. We delimit ourselves to this idea that money makes the world change. True change comes from how we think and what we say and how we treat others, from a very local level to the global level. You may be wondering to yourself, like, I don't work in philanthropy. I don't work for a foundation. I don't have a talent. How can I contribute? You can, with the words you say and the way you think. And I just want to say thank you for being here and taking the time to listen to me, and thank you for KACF. Another special time to you.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for sharing your heart and your soul and reminding all of us what is at the root of philanthropy. And I'm sure that all of us are going to carry your words with us today. Anyway, I told you this was going to be an inspiring session. So, also appreciated what you said about narrative change and how each of us has a role in that. And so our next speaker is an expert in telling stories and telling our stories. It's Myung-Ok-Lee. She's an author and a teacher and an important Korean American voice whose essays you've probably read in the New York Times and many other national publications. Her first novel, Finding My Voice, was published in 1992 and is one of the first, maybe the first, YA young adult novel to feature an Asian American protagonist who faces racism growing up in Minnesota. And Rhee, who is from Hibbing, Minnesota, which she notes is also the hometown of Bob Dylan, and where he got laughed off the stage. Rhee writes about another character from Minnesota in her new book, The Evening Hero, which you are going to be getting copies of, and we'll be able to, we're going to have a book signing session with Rhee at the end of the Giving Summit. So that is a real treat. Yay. Rhee is a co-founder of the Asian American Writers Workshop, where so many Asian American authors have found their voice and support, and I encourage you to check out their programs if you're a writer or a reader. A fun Giving Summit trivia fact. Oh, I'm not going to say this because maybe you're going to say it in your talk. So I'll save it. If you don't say it, I'll say it later. But she loves Yukjang. So now we're going to hear another perspective on giving from Myung-Ok-Lee.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Jeannie. Thank you to my fellow speakers. Thank you for everyone in the audience. I'm always impressed when people can speak off the cuff. You're not allowed in a TED Talk to use notes, but I'm a writer, so I wrote it down for you. Because I want to make sure that I'm saying most effectively what I want to say. And what the perspective I'm coming to you today is I want to talk about philanthropy from what I call the money poor, a condition for which I am intimately familiar being a writer. So in college, I majored in economics, and right out of college, as I was trying to figure out how to build a sustainable career as a writer, graduate school or a low-paying job like being a waitress or working in publishing was not an option for me. I was extremely fortunate because of my parents' hard work. I did not have any college debt. But part of my very simple career plan was to live in the city that is the literary capital of the world. So in order to do that, I spent 6 years of my life working on Wall Street mostly at Goldman Sachs, the repository of Asian American overachievers everywhere. So I think you could say I also understand how money works. And so most people do think of philanthropy in terms of money because it's part of American history. First you have to be a robber baron and make a ton of money, and then you give it all back to the libraries. Like, I really love the Morgan Library, which is down there. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about there are more expansive ways to think about philanthropy. Actually, Sebastian mentioned the etymology of the word philanthropy comes from two Greek roots, philos, dear, loved, beloved, and anthropos, human being. So there's no money in philanthropy. There's literally no money in the word philanthropy. So I want to start from there, because a philanthropist is somebody who loves other human beings and wants to do actions that benefit them. So that's where I am coming from here. So I want to talk about how can we all be philanthropists. We can. And I'm going to use myself as an example because I know myself. And I am someone who's been a philanthropist since I was 16 years old. And I have never been a billionaire in money, that is. Okay, so, oops, sorry. It's supposed to go back. So, my life's work started with this typewriter. My parents bought it for themselves for their wedding present in 1953 when they immigrated as Korean War refugees to the US. They came here literally with $200, of which some portion of that was spent on this typewriter. And it was not a romantic notion at all. It was my father needed something so he could print out his letters to try to get a job. So my two much older brothers used this typewriter throughout high school and college to type their papers. So by the time it got to me, it was completely busted up and completely magic. Those little gold things on there, I put them on because this is my magic typewriter. And so I was 9 years old, and I had already been writing stories, but once I typed it out and it came out looking so professional off the platen, I 3-hole punched it, and I bound it with yarn, and I sold it to my parents for $0.25. And I literally was like, I am going to do this for the rest of my life when I was 9. And that is what, sort of, it didn't quite go as smoothly as one would like. But you can see, at the time also, I was telling everyone I was going to be a doctor, because that's what my parents told me I was going to be doing. I'm sure this has never happened to anyone in their whole life in this room. So by the time I was in high school, I was actually publishing in national magazines. This was published when I was 16 years old. My parents actually made this. I don't know why there's 2 slides. This is kind of embarrassing. I didn't mean to send the second one. But my parents, I was 16 years old when I had this article about volunteer work. My parents were completely unimpressed. They said, maybe it'll help you get into Harvard, which, spoiler alert, it did not. And they literally said, I mean, given that they had both survived the Korean War, they both came from divided families, my parents' immigration story was incredibly difficult. They came here first ending up in Jim Crow, Alabama, and then my parents became undocumented, which is how they ended up in northern Minnesota. The place where we live is called by Good Morning America the country's icebox. It's actually a place not a lot of people who weren't born there want to live. So for my parents with that background, for them, it was imperative for me to not do anything outlandish and do something that would give me financial support. So by not doing anything outlandish, to them that meant not doing anything that was not going to directly lead to me being a doctor, or if I couldn't do that, being a lawyer. So what I did in college is I majored in economics. But what I didn't tell them is that in my college, economics had the fewest course requirements of any of the majors. So even though I was in the honors program and I was getting set up for my Wall Street career, I had the maneuverability to take classes in basically outlandish things like Russian literature, religious studies, creative writing. Again, in a way that everything seems unmovable and fixed was actually not, if you could take a minute and be a little bit creative about it. And what I want to talk about is philanthropy is really no different, because people have been thinking about philanthropy for a long time. Like this guy, Charles Dickens. Bleak House came out in 1853, exactly 100 years before my parents immigrated. And Bleak House has a whole chapter called Telescopic Philanthropy, in which Dickens introduces us to an unforgettable satiric character, Mrs. Jellyby. This is Mrs. Jellyby on the right. Mrs. Jellyby is a rich lady. She's the mother of Cathy, Pee-Pee, and 3 other children. I think that's Cathy helping her write these solicitation letters. Mrs. Jellyby is a self-described philanthropist and is obsessed with a project to uplift people in Africa. But in the meantime, she's so monomaniacally fixated on this philanthropy project that she neglects her family. One of the kids falls down the stairs. The other kid is so dirty that this carriage stops because they think he's an orphan who needs to be taken to the orphanage. So Dickens, as Dickens is so good at doing with satire, he's basically giving us this idea that maybe some mindfulness is necessarily in philanthropy, that can be more effective than merely throwing cash. Because also what happens in the end is Mrs. Jellyby's family becomes bankrupt because of her zeal for Africa. So I want to talk about, money's helpful, but money is not everything. And some people say time is money. It is indisputably a precious resource just like money. It might be even more precious because it is a non-renewable resource. You can't make any more of it. You can't bank it. So one of the things, as Jeannie mentioned, that I put a lot of time in my 20s was creating a nonprofit. With a similar impulse to the founders of the KACF, 3 writer friends and I wanted to create a literary organization specifically to help Asian American writers get published. This was all done through our endless volunteer hours and our financial donations as board members. This is one of our, we were always constantly, this is actually at the Asian American Festival in Union Square. We were everywhere. So we are incorporated as the Asian American Writers Workshop, for which I served as the board president for 10 years. And our mission was to help nurture Asian American writers to compete in the marketplace that favors white male writers. And the AAWW ended up being instrumental in the careers of writers like Cathy Park Hong, who was an early intern, and Min-Jin Lee, who utilized our low-cost workshops that helped her make the transition from lawyer to the writer that you know today. And it's obviously easy to see the many gifts she's bestowed on our community and the reading community beyond with her work. And so, and as you probably all know, that there have been scientific studies that say that reading fiction has been scientifically proven to produce empathy. In fact, I actually met someone, this is a little bit of a side, at the NSA, and he claimed they don't let you read fiction in the NSA because they don't want you to be empathetic or something, because you're open to spies. I don't know if he was just turning me on. I don't know if he was just kidding me, but anyways. I think reading fiction and empathy is a universal good. So empathy is actually what we need to produce the conditions for which we can have social justice and other forms of helping other humans. And of course, storytelling is a human need. Fiction is an art form, starting with reading the Odyssey, with reciting the Odyssey around a fire. It's Harriet Beecher Stowe writing Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's Steinbeck chronicling the plight of migrants in the Dust Bowl. It's Barbara Kingsolver in our contemporary life taking on poverty and dispossession and Purdue Pharma in her newly released novel, Demon Copperhead, for which if it sounds familiar at all, it's because it's a takeoff on our friend Dickens's book, David Copperfield. So I like to think my work similarly helps advance social issues and promotes empathy, like being the weird kid in high school who did the volunteer work. I also feel like my whole work has to be something that is in itself an act of giving back. So back to volunteer work, if the piece I had in 17 magazine was called Volunteer Work Does Pay Off. Yeah, I think I could have come up with a better title for that, but I was 16. But volunteer work is something I have done continually since I was 16. And now that I'm an established writer and lecturer, my fee for speaking engagements is $5,000, which is actually on the low side of what most people in my speaking agency get. Almost everyone starts at 10. I'm like their half-price author. But so a couple times there have been reactions when people have contacted the agency they'll email me going, what? You're going to get paid $5,000 to speak English for an hour? For which I say, no, you are going to get the result that is a lifetime of me writing and learning how to be a writer. So, but when I was doing a book signing in Florida, for instance, when the people invited me and paid my way there, I took the time to go to 3 different underserved schools and do readings and workshops with the students there. So to me, I have donated $15,000 of my time. And so the other thing that I do is I actually engage in tithing. Ever since my first book was published 30 years ago, I always donate 10% of the proceeds. And it's not always to a 501c3. It can include a cash donation to a friend's brother who has cancer, buying an Instant Pot to help my friend cook. I also have automatic monthly donations to Kundiman, which is an Asian American poetry organization. And the beauty to me of the 10% is that the amount grows as I grow, and then I don't even have to put a lot of time into it. And so, and another simple thing we can do, that we all can do, is amplification. So when I was trying to raise money for the Asian American Writers Workshop, I was always surprised, because Goldman had this program, and most corporations do, that many people seem to not know that their firm had matching donation programs. So that's just one easy way to just double your donation to whatever you're doing. And so I work in higher education now, but I still feel that there are creative ways to make my donations go further. So for instance, when I went to that school in Florida, I told my publisher that, hey, I'm going to be doing this volunteer work, and I'm planning to buy some books to give to the students. How about you guys? So they ended up not only matching my donation of books, they gave a ton of books. So we ended up being able to distribute 70 books so that each child in the school got their own book. And today, right after the keynote, when I'll be doing the signing, if you want your book signed, I will let you know that Simon Schuster has very generously offered to donate these books in support of KACF. So to close, philanthropy is often thought reflexively as 1, altruism, 2, as donations of money. Both these things are part of it, but by no means restricted to it. I actually want to push you to think about it a little more creatively, because some of us are going to be good at business and make a lot of money, and that can be used to foment change at scale via cash donations. But in the actual giving back part, there's not actually a lot of difference between me and JP Morgan. Because, yes, just hold on a minute, I'm going to explain. I might even argue that there might even be a bigger difference between me, who donates significant resources, and say a rich corporation that donates a lot of money but is actually using philanthropy as a cover for harmful things that their company does. We need more companies like Eunice's company. So we really have to ask ourselves, besides thinking about others and altruism, we have to think back to ourselves. What is our ideal self that allows us to give to other people? In a way, and giving in a way that is mindful and not ego-driven. Being a Mrs. Jellybee and giving all your money away while your children suffer is not a great way. It's not generous and it's not altruistic. I'm thinking more in terms of when you're in a plane crash and they say, here comes the oxygen masks, putting your own oxygen mask on first before your child is not selfish. It's essential, and that is the way that you both benefit. So I want us all to take a moment to think, what are my skills? What's my abundance, my luck, my resources, and how can I use that to give back? And because you're all here, you're obviously all thinking about it. So I'm so grateful to be able to share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to have a little time for questions. And I know our panelists really wanted this to feel like a conversation also. So, and I think the three of you feel free to ask each other questions too. I'll just kick things off. There is a question in the Whova, which was also a question I had, and maybe others do too, just around sort of the origins of how you started thinking about giving, like your volunteering, and Eunice, you talked about your family kitchen table, but did you have active, I'll ask Eunice first, conversations around giving, or what did you learn from your parents?
Yeah, it's interesting that Marie talks about tithing, because I grew up, as I think so many probably Korean Americans do, in the church. And I remember, at least from a company perspective, when I first started talking about it with my co-founder, we actually took the notion of tithing too and said, what would it look like if we just said roughly 10%-ish could we give not only in money but also in time and in effort? And so for us, I totally relate to what Marie was saying. It kind of gives you a really clear standard that you can start working off of. And that's ultimately how we got started from a business perspective. Life perspective, I mean, I think it's just my dad. Like I would say, I remember sitting in the car with him right before college and saying, Dad, like, I don't know, should I go make money? Should I like, what should I do? And he said, just do what you're meant to do and the giving will come naturally. And he's like, it's so integrated in just who you are and the way that you think about things. So he gave me kind of the life perspective, but from a business perspective, I think having like a clear goal and being able to use that as a guardrail has been really helpful as a young and early company.
Thank you. And Marie, how did you, like the volunteering, where did that come from? Did that come from your family, or what sparked it?
No, I have to admit it was a mandated thing that I had to do, which I wrote about in the article. I was very honest about it. But it was something that I really wanted, and the volunteer work was just something I had to do. And then in the end, the thing I really wanted paled in comparison to the volunteer work that I did, and it was visiting an elderly person and just doing chores for her. And then I just realized that I actually really enjoyed that. Ooh, and I ended up writing a short story about it as well. So that's, my mic.
I think it fell.
Thanks. That's how that worked.
And Sebastian, I don't know if there were maybe you can fill in for us, like how you got from when you, your incarceration ended to thinking about and applying for this job at Open Society Foundations. Like how did you decide you wanted to be in philanthropy to begin with?
So I think the fight for social justice becomes increasingly important the more victimized you become by social injustice. And many folks might think that people who are incarcerated deserve to be there, deserve to be treated the way they are. If you had any idea of what it's like to be in there, I think you would change your mind in that regard. You are completely dehumanized. I became, not Sebastian Yoon, I became inmate 08A0068. And you put on a green uniform. Doesn't matter what color you are, if you have that green, you are an animal. And you are treated as such. I wanted to come home and be part of a career or a group of people who made an effort to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves or who need assistance in fighting for justice, for equality and equity. And I love waking up and doing the work that I do, but I know it's a long and hard fight.
Thank you. There's another question here about, and I think all of you have talked about narrative change, about telling your story, but also about finding common cause with other people. And so the question is, what have you found, or what are some best practices for having conversations with those who have very firm viewpoints that are in opposition to yours? Anyone can jump in. No, it's not an easy question.
That's why I wrote my novel to some degree. I mean, it sounds really dumb, but it had started out as this very witty take on Middlemarch and entrepreneurship in medicine. But after the 2016 election, I somehow yanked it back, and the young bro dude ended up having to take a backseat to this 70-ish older Korean immigrant. And the actual moment was when someone in my hometown Facebook group posted a bumper sticker very proudly, because this is when Trump was talking about nuking North Korea. And the bumper sticker said, every day 56 species of animal go extinct. North Koreans need to be next. And at that moment, I just thought, my father, we've lived in this town. My parents are both from North Korea. And this just became this mission to me to humanize North Koreans. And I know it sounds really simplistic and dumb, but this novel, I was like, why did it take you 18 years? And that was one of the reasons. The 2016 election was, it's back to the drawing board. I want to do something much more consequential, use my story, as opposed to just writing a really intelligent kind of Jonathan Franzen-ish book. And ego-wise, I think I would have preferred to write like a really smart book. But just in terms of what I was talking about, I feel like my work always has to be part of my giving. And that was specifically that I wanted to humanize these little Asian men like my father, because everybody dismisses them and are racist to them, and there's a million microaggressions. And through story, that is the most powerful way that I can do it, versus, I don't know, like holding a sign or something. This is just what I do.
Well, it's not dumb at all. So you managed to be smart and get your message across. Anybody else?
I can speak to it from kind of a business perspective, in that whenever we kind of feature different organizations or talk about maybe bigger, more social causes, inevitably in our customer service inbox, we get, please take me off this. I can't believe you guys are using your business to talk about things like this. I used to like your company. Who do you think you are? I mean, we get a lot of inbounds of people saying, I'm taking my business elsewhere. And I think what we try and do is, one, write a really personal note back and try and talk about, hey, what we're doing here is we're just trying to talk about real people's stories. And I think that's why we always go back to having people tell their own story and really invite people to go deep and not just talk about, on our social media channels and or through blog articles. Like, we really try and tell a more longitudinal story, so that it's not just once, but that you're really getting to know the person behind the cause or the person behind the organization. Because at the end of the day, our response is always, well, that's someone's story. And so we're not sitting here trying to spew all this ideology to you. We're just trying to uplift someone's narrative. And that's their own story, and that's their story to tell. So I think that's how at least we've kind of been able to approach it from, again, very much like a company perspective. Because it is hard. It is really personal. But I think by telling people, hey, guess what? It is personal, and that's why we're telling these stories, it at least feels a little more like a safe space, I guess. So that's how we've kind of worked through it.
Does it hurt when you get those
all the
messages?
time. Oh my God, a lot. Only because I think, again, like as a kind of a type A Korean American woman, like I have been a people pleaser like my whole life, and so hearing that from customers who have opened up their wallets to buy something from us, of course it cuts deep. But I think that's where I go back to like being rooted in something more than just our P&L statement, and having a real reason for, hey, but that's okay, because guess what? We're talking about things we care about, and not everyone's going to agree with it, and that's fine. That's made it a lot better. But yeah, it's hard. Mental health as like a founder is a real thing, especially when you're getting such personal like attacks. and they include my family when I showcase my girls, and I mean, it gets real. But I think the cause and the reason for what we're doing is so much greater than just my own. I guess in some regards, like my own feelings and my own story.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And Sebastian, you talked about, having really, or coming up against viewpoints that you really didn't agree with or that you think are harmful. I mean, how do you try to change those points of view, or maybe at what point do you decide that takes too much of your own energy?
Well, one of the simple tactics that I've used is just put yourself in that situation, and how would you think if somebody said that about you? And I think it has been impactful in kind of swaying or changing the direction of the conversation to being more productive. It does bother me because you hear it from friends and even family members, and you just have to be the one who, sometimes you're the awkward person at the dinner table, providing a perspective that's different from everyone else, and that could be challenging. And I think a lot of times we feel pressure to be reticent, and even in the workspace. But like I said earlier, I think we need to be courageous and just speak up whenever we feel the need to.
Eunice, you brought up mental health, and maybe that doesn't seem naturally like something we'd be talking about in philanthropy, but the work that all of you are doing is hard, and the change that you're trying to make in this world is hard. So I'm wondering about, what do you do to take care of your mental health, or to help others take care of theirs?
I mean, I'm happy to share about it because it's something that doesn't get spoken a lot about, particularly in the entrepreneur space, because you're supposed to show up and always be the one that's like, go, 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 it's so exciting, this is so wonderful. And it is really, it's hard. I mean, it's hard being, I think, a business owner. And I think for me, personally, I find and draw a lot of strength from just friends and family. I don't know if this makes sense for mental health, but I have 2 young children. And I feel like for being able to separate a little bit of like the work life from my own life at home has been really critical. Being really active, like it's such small things. It's not like I can sit there and journal about it. It's me being super intentional about how I allocate time in my day. So if I can make sure that I can go for a walk or that I can just clear my head. I'm very fortunate to have a co-founder that I have been friends with for 15 years that we can just talk through a lot of these things very openly. But and I do little things like, unless it's an emergency, I try not to look at all of our customer service inbox emails for the very reason of, because I take everything so personally, like I really absorb everything. And so I think it's like little things I've learned over the years to just put roadblocks or little, almost like speed bumps, just to make sure that before things get to me, they can dissolve down a little bit. And that helps, but I think also talking about it more, especially in rooms like this with Asian Americans, is really important because it is a real struggle, and finding day-to-day things I think has helped me a lot.
Rhee?
I do an anti-10%, sort of the opposite of the tithing, kind of what Eunice is talking about, where we're so much of our young life is like, you have to be perfect, and so you can work at Goldman Sachs or whatever. And now I have a career, I have a full-time job. I have a son who is very severely disabled, and I take care of him, and he lives at home. And I literally can't do everything. And so, I feel like it's really important for me to have exercise. So so I bike down here from Harlem, but then I didn't realize like there was all this marathon stuff going on. And I came here really, really sweaty, but I feel like I have this mental 10%. Like, well, they're just gonna have to understand because I'm doing the best that I can. I literally wasn't late, but I thought I was gonna be late. But it's just more about being more gentle with myself, but also being more gentle with people. Like Sebastian, I really thought that was really interesting because a friend had recently wanted to like write an op-ed, because I write a lot of op-eds, and she wanted to do an op-ed about why are we ignoring the fact that it's Black people who are attacking all these Asians. And so I had to take all this time to be like, this is really well written, I'm really glad, like she's a doctor and I've been encouraging her to write. But at the same time, I have to kind of try to tell her that this is not the most helpful way, and that actually statistically, if you look at it, on a more macro level, this actually isn't happening and so forth, that at the same time that since she holds these views that I personally oppose and find objectionable, but she's still my friend, that's another 10% way that I just feel like this is kind of how you live. Like, I can do my best to try to help her, and then she can get angry at me because she feels like I'm not helping her get published, even though I had promised her that. So it really is about you can't be perfect all the time, you can't do everything, you can't not be sweaty when you bike all the way here and you're freaked out about being late. You just have to deal with what you have, and I just think in life, this is how we are. We're never gonna be not racist or so forth. It's kind of, there's more give and take to life, which is probably one of the things that's been a real gift of aging, is learning if you don't get this on your SATs, your life is over. My parents actually literally said my life was over when I didn't get into Harvard. They're like, your life is over. We're not gonna drive you to college. But it was such a gift to me because I had to figure out what I was gonna do with my life, and that's how I ended up being able to be very clever and maneuverable, because my other siblings who did go to Harvard felt like, I'm in this box, I did what I was supposed to do, and they are actually having a harder time of being older because they never figured out what they had to do because someone always told them what to do. So I also think not allowing society or other people always tell you what to do is one core way that I feel like, at least for me, that I maintain my own mental health.
Well, you look great, and I'm very impressed that you biked here.
Sebastian, did you want to add anything?
I go to the gym. No, but philanthropy is actually really tough for me because I do have a lot of social anxiety, and I prefer solitude, but when you're working in philanthropy, you have to have conversations with so many organizations and people.
Right.
And I'm still learning after 3 years of being at OSF how to be comfortable in that space.
Well, this is a related question that came up. It said, when we reimagine philanthropy as a love of humanity, how have you created relationships across class and race that bring you into closer proximity with the communities where you communities of need, but maybe communities where you feel less comfortable or pushed out of your own comfort zone? What has that required?
So when I do speaking engagements for the College Behind Bars film or the Free Church Julia film, especially for the College Behind Bars film, there are seldomly any Asian faces in the audience. So I've always felt like an outsider whenever I spoke about criminal justice reform, as if this was a black and brown issue. But the problem is disinformation. For instance, in California, there is a significant amount of Southeast Asians who are in the prisons. I think once people have a better understanding of the social injustice issues, and that is our job who work in these kind of fields to educate folks, it would be easier to come to the table as a collective, as opposed to just speaking about certain issues that may just affect, on the surface, one particular group.
Anyone else want to add anything about that?
I think for us, we kind of hand over the mic. We just say, look, we've built this platform. Can you help speak about this yourself and help us better understand? And we do a lot more, I'd say, listening than anything else. So, even in working with the Lower East Side Girls Club, there's actually a lot of similar emotions and narratives and stories that we all feel, but being able to support an organization and say, for the entire, basically, month of November, when everyone's talking about holiday, we're going to give you all these chances to talk about your story, your mission, and giving them that space. I think that's how we've been able to, not only support them, but also learn ourselves and make sure that we're not trying to take over their own narrative.
Oh, and before I forget, I just want to remind folks too, if you didn't vote yet, please go vote.
Yes.
And
Yes.
help others if they have language barriers, please.
Okay, the fire department, I've never gotten one of these up here. The fire department will be doing a systems test in the next few minutes, so
my
please
God.
disregard any alarms. We're not in danger. Just stay in your seats and stay calm. Are there any questions out in the audience, or did you all have questions you wanted to ask each other? We can have a little bit of free flow here.
I'd be interested to hear someone in the audience explain what they think philanthropy is and what philanthropy ought to be. If somebody could be brave, I would really appreciate it. Somebody who's not in the foundation space, preferably. No judgment, though. Thank you.
So,
What's your name?
Hi, I'm G. Nice to see you all. So I'm not in the. So I don't have a background in philanthropy. I come from technology management. How does one get involved? I mean, I'm here. I'm obviously interested, and I'm ready to commit. I just don't know how to enter the space. If you have some practical suggestions, I'm all ears.
Do you mean in terms of employment, or what you could do in your personal capacity, just to be
I
clear?
mean, I think ideally both. If that sounds like a win-win to match your purpose to how you make a living, but just in terms of giving time and effort and money. I mean, money is easy, as everybody has kind of pointed to, but if I want to look for a more meaningful connection, like Eunice, you said you were looking for, how does one get involved?
Where's Kyung? He's the person you should talk to. Yeah, but I think, no, seriously though, I think Kyung would provide really good guidance in that department. I mean, KACF staff is all over, so you definitely have a network here. So after this TED Talk, I would strongly encourage you to have conversations.
I can speak to maybe a little bit of, again, non-material related. Jeannie kind of mentioned it earlier this year with Judy and Jumi Song, who's on the board. We put together Panchan Box Party, and that really actually was after participating in the Community Grants Committee, Community Grants Giving Committee at KACF, and just hearing a lot of the statistics for what was happening in the tri-state area to the Korean community. And so we started small, and we just said, who do we know, and what towns do we have to give? We happen to know a lot of people who cook, and a lot of people who have great social media influences. So we said, let's just ping all of them and figure out, can we put something together? And we started really small with what we knew. Like, we didn't try and go and plan a giving summit, right? Because we would have no idea what we're doing. We said, we know how to cook, we know how to make good food, we know how to market it, so let's start there. And we ended up bringing, I think, 13 people together. Jennifer Rupan, I know who's here from Rice Blossoms, and that's how we did it. And I think really it activated within a lot of Korean Americans, like, I don't actually have to give and write this massive check, and I don't actually have to do that, something that's drastically different from my day-to-day. I just have to find a way to funnel that and channel that and direct it to the right place, and that required a little bit of research. But we were really lucky to be able to put something like that together.
I just want to add something. It seems that philanthropy is easier from afar when the issue that you want to support is an idea and it's not immediately around you. I think social media has been an exemplary thing for that, because people put up stories and posts and think that it's in and of itself is enough, because you show the issues to your friends and family that you're doing enough. I think philanthropy, we need to reimagine philanthropy so that it can occur in your immediate surrounding. The people that you engage with on a daily basis, like I said earlier about narrative change, you don't have to be part of a foundation. You don't have to be rich. Philanthropy can occur, or the roots of philanthropy can occur in the ways you treat other people who are around you. And not just your friends and families, but people, maybe even strangers. Little acts of kindness. That's what empowers. That's what keeps philanthropy going, the love of humanity.
So, thank you. I know I'm getting the sign to wrap up here. So again, I think our panelists will be here for a little while longer. I'm actually going to call up Don Lim from our associate board, who is going to explain what we'll be doing over lunch. And I think, G, you'll actually have the opportunity to meet some other folks here who can tell you about how they started their giving journeys. But I think mostly it's just like, we're saying, look around at what what moves you and what seems important to you, and starting there. So Don, come on up. Thank you to our speakers for really, for sharing their hearts with us. So.
That's the first slide from James Rhee. My name is Juju Chang. I'm the co-anchor of ABC News Nightline. Thank you. I'm also one of the founding board members of KACF 20 years ago, and thank you. And I also just have the honor and the distinction of being close girlfriends with the previous two hosts. Jeannie Park and Yoon and I have known each other for the better part of 30 years. And it's ironic to me that we were all journalists, right? Storytellers at a time when Sebastian pointed out from the stage that narrative change is so important. I was really struck by that. And I think that we all do our part in being a community and also helping our community, and then hopefully linking arms with other communities. I took a few notes because I've taken in so much from this morning's session. I was so impressed by everyone who spoke up here from the heart. Like Cathy said, I think we have the commonality of knowing the sting of racism and what that's like, and wanting to help others who may be in those positions of poverty and underprivilege. And from Eunice, I pulled up so much about how you can sort of align your values, your core values, along with a desire to help others, and whether that is aligning virtue with profit, which is something that our next speaker, James Rhee, is talking about. I thought to myself, I immediately want to buy all of the material cooking goods, right? But it also occurred to me that as a consumer, I've spent my dollars in those ways. I buy Bomba socks because I know they donate one to homeless people. I buy Patagonia because I know they donate so much to the environment. There are ways that we as consumers, right, act philanthropically. There are ways that we as investors and certainly as donors can act philanthropically. So I have the honor of introducing James Rhee. And there are so many ways of introducing him, and I certainly don't want to read his CV, but just by way of preview, I will tell you that he refers to himself always as a hot mess, but really he's an impact investor, a recovering finance guy who has all the fancy degrees that you could imagine. He was the CEO for a time of a company called Ashley Stewart, which I misspoke and said Ashley Madison. I was like, no, I mean Ashley Stewart. And when I heard the turnaround story and the impact it had on the community, I immediately went online and bought this shirt from AshleyStewart.com. And you'll see why that's so important once you hear James speak. But fundamentally, he's an impact investor. He's an educator. A teacher in many regards, both on the high school, middle school level, but now at universities, and he'll tell you about that as well. And that is a way for him to sort of connect and build community as well. So without any further ado, I hope at some point you'll all watch his TED Talk on the red helicopter, and I know he'll talk a little bit about that coming up. But ladies and gentlemen, James Rhee.
I don't have anything that's woo-worthy other than the fact that I definitely had a bunch of kimchi at lunch, and it feels great to have kimchi breath and be allowed to have that in this audience. I look around; it's really moved to be here. Like it's like I give talks to big audiences, and I think you'll understand when I say with this intimate audience, with the faces here, I'm actually more nervous than I've ever been, because I really would like for this to go well. So, like Juju said, I came in here without I didn't have a fixed speech, fixed remarks. I really wanted to immerse and just listen. So I've been listening to the panelists, what's been coming up. And what I'm going to hope to do is try to pull it all together in one story a bit, and to show you at the very end just a couple of visuals to make it really pop for you. But I've heard words like creativity, redefining, really questioning vocabulary. It's about actions. What's a distinctive way to be Korean in, quote, philanthropy? The sort of anti-dualism, like for-profit, not-for-profit, Korean, American, trying to rethink what the future will look like, really challenging systems, right? Not settling for the status quo and saying, what can we do in the same format? But as Kyung's saying, why can't we think really in a venture way, right? Like reinventing systems, but being very deliberate and realistic too, right? And we also heard a lot about longitudinally, how it's hard to do longitudinal things, small things over and over and over again, and it takes collective. And we also talked about race. And I know that wasn't on part of the agenda, that this was about Korean American Community Foundation, but there's been a lot of talk about working with other communities in a broad spectrum of brown. And I think that's one of the things that Asian Americans and Korean Americans, there's a growing realization that we are indeed, quote, minorities in this country, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a minority mindset. And so what does that mean? Okay? And with Sebastian, where is he? I don't know if he's still here, but also about I want to talk about the distinction between some men and women, the Korean male and Korean female experience as well. I think that's going to be wrapped in this story. Sound good? I'm going to try to do all this, okay? I think like in a lot of things, these are some origin stories. That's me. That's my mom. I was born here, and then we lived in the Bronx and in Yonkers, and I spent most of my childhood, all of my childhood really, in Long Island. We were the generally only minority family in our town. So North Shore, beyond exit 62 LIE. That was me. And I'm the second, like Duce Adel, but I'm the first son my father met, because my older brother, they didn't have enough money and security to bring him here. So my grandmother raised my brother in Korea until he was around 4.5 years old, 5 years old. So my father met me first. So I've lived a life of oxymorons. You can tell most of my life I've tried to not be put into a box. It's something that I finally discovered myself. I'm like, everyone always wants to put me in this box. But there are no boxes in nature. They don't exist, just salt cubes. Those are boxes. That shape doesn't exist. Why does everyone so insistent on putting me in a box? And that's kind of a lot of the mindset that I had. I didn't really realize I was kind of an other on Long Island, but I did. Just like other Korean families, my parents would hide the kimchi. They would spray the kitchen to make sure that no one could smell it. I lived almost parallel lives for most of my childhood. And that's a picture of our first trip to Korea together as a family. That's my sister. She is alive. She's just sleeping very soundly. I realize in this picture it looks like, what's going on? But this is the first time after 10 years my parents had saved up enough money to go back to Korea with their family. They had not seen their relatives for like 10 years. And I think, not to sort of belabor the point, but yeah, my parents were very lonely. And we always lived, my dad was a caregiver, and my mother was a caregiver. So my dad was a pediatrician, small business owner. He hung out a shingle, and he did this. He played paduk, waiting for patients. He just, I hope this works. My mother was a nurse. And then when she had me, she spent most of her time raising us. And so later on, you'll get to the point where at Harvard, I studied a lot of politics, philosophy, and economics. And I realized that my mother's caregiving had absolutely zero economic value in GDP, right? According to everything I learned at Harvard, my mother's life had zero value for my childhood. And so these are the type of things I was thinking about, just stewing on and learning. I'm saying, oh, I'm being taught to really unlearn many things that I learned in my house. And we all know about Korean culture, it is incredibly generous. Sometimes not so generous in words, but really generous in small actions, right? Little Yeongdon, right? The food's always sitting right there. It's like like serving with two hands. Sometimes it was foreign to me because my parents didn't do a great job teaching it to me, but it was beautiful. because we're going to get to acts of generosity and kindness. These are not words. It's always actions. In Korean culture, there's a lot of acts of generosity. I think but sometimes the words are not as generous. It's actually quite opposite, I think, to a lot of the culture here, where the words are incredibly generous and magnanimous, but they don't do anything. And so Harvard was the first brand that I had, right? I was a public school kid, and that's the first brand, and it felt overwhelming at times. I always resisted it. I was like, I don't want to be, someone just said, the Harvard friends, was it Maria, said the Harvard friends didn't do very well, or like they were told what to do. I drowned in this brand in 18 to 22. I had a lot of fun, but I had a hard time reconciling what I was doing. Meanwhile, so I talk about generosity here, my parents, because they were caregivers, I had a hard time reconciling being generous and achieving what they wanted me to achieve. It constantly played with me. So for instance, when my brother and I were young, Domino's Pizza came up, and it was, if you didn't get the pizza in 30 minutes, the pizza was free. And so we would wait at the door with a clock, because we didn't have a lot of extra money in the Rhee household. It was tight, right? So we're like, I think implicitly there was a bit of scarcity mindset. And the kid would come 31 minutes, and we say, you're late. And my dad would always say, yeah, like, no. And I said, why? That's the economic rule. And he said, no, like, what happens if that was you, the delivery boy? Like, you can't do that. That's how we were raised. My mother, the Korean picnics, we would have these all-day decathlon picnics. You know what? Koreans come to the state park, right? And our team would be winning until the last event, and then the relay race. And my mother would be the anchor leg, and she would let the kid pass her to win. And we would be driving home, and I would say, Mom, all day, like, why did you let that kid win? And she would look at me and say, is that how you want to win? You want your mother to run full speed and beat the little kid? So these are the type of things at the same time they wanted me to achieve. There was a lot of pressure to achieve. And I was having a hard time reconciling those two. Like, how can I be generous? And you want me to achieve in a foreign country where you don't know the rules. This isn't how it works in a large part of academia and this economy. And so what Juju mentioned is that what happened is that in 2013, I had been in a lot of tall buildings managing, billions and billion dollars of private equity money. I invested a lot of consumer retail products. I had forgotten a lot of myself from my 20s and my childhood, I think. I taught high school after college. I went to law school to be a public defender. And here I was moving around big money, right, and doing things. And private equity was changing a bit. It was becoming a little bit more of a financial product. And I was having, again, a hard time reconciling teacher James. And I really like investing. Like, why can't I be both? Why can't I be Korean? Why can't I be, quote, American? All of these things. And at 42 years old in 2013, I was on the board of a company called Ashley Stewart. You can see the pictures of the ladies. It was just a portfolio company, an investment. And my father was dying, Parkinson's, and a miserable Parkinson's. Like, to the end, when his last days, he couldn't see, walk, hear, write, eat. And my mother was taking care of him. I would constantly try to hire help. And my mother would always fire the help because she said, we don't want, I got it. And so my mother was you have to picture me just sitting here, and my Korean's not great. I can understand it pretty well, but it was so top head. I couldn't help. Because how do you talk about medical care and emotional needs of my mother? My mother and I were very, very close, which will become apparent to you. I couldn't help. So they have this son who they put through Harvard, and here's this the prize boy, and I can't even help my parents. And I'm moving money around. I don't have medical skills. I'm like, what can I do to help you? So That's how I felt. And so there was this company called Ashley Stewart. It serves black, women, plus size, moderate low income. Those are 4 strikes, okay? Most of the systems in this country that I was sent to school to learn, law school, tax system, securities laws, financial markets, they're not helping that woman. And I got struck at 42 with this. These women reminded me of my mom. And I would walk in the store and I would see these women come in and I could just see, you can see in a woman's, like her neck, she felt comfortable, right? This little place was actually, to me, not a retailer of clothes. It was like a safe place. And historically, it is one of the largest, oldest brands serving black women in this country. But no one really saw it that way. Remember about perception. They're like, it's plus size clothes for black women retail. I'm like, I don't think that's what it is. You're not taking time to really look. And most people said, we don't care. And I said, oh, just like growing up, right? My mom, all the times, like when we would come once a year into Queens to get load up on Korean food, I could see my mom change. Like she was like, it was like the Korean Z-snap. Every other place, my mom would sort of walk with her shoulders a little bit down, necks down, and I hated it as a kid. And my role as a kid was really, I would walk next to my mother and I'm like, Mom, you're good. Mom, you're good. And if anyone messed with my mother, little boy went, I'm like, don't do that. And that was my role. And so my dad's dying, I'm looking at my family, I'm thinking about my childhood, I'm thinking about the life that they wanted me to have here, oftentimes it being a burden to be a caretaker's son, caregiving. It was a burden sometimes to be Korean. And I'm sort of reconciling all this. And I went down. The board meeting said, screw this company, it's going to liquidate, it's just an investment. Who cares? And I said, I do. I care. They said, oh, what are you going to do about it, James? Big shot. And you have to picture the boardroom, right? There are not a lot of these faces in that boardroom. There are not a lot of those faces on the upper left in that boardroom. And I said, well, I guess I'll be interim CEO for 6 months. I know restructuring and bankruptcy. I'll just find it another home. I got to buy 6 months, and I'm going to get it to a place. I'm going to come home. I'm going to resume my identity that my parents wanted me to have. And so I left. I left Boston. I walked away from my life for 6 months, and I showed up in Secaucus, New Jersey, and I said, 안녕하세요. Like, I'm your new CEO. And I said, I know. I know what it looks like. I know what I look like. But I think you remind me of my mom a lot. And would you please help me? Help me. Like, help me understand what's going on here. Like, why has this business never made money? How come you don't have Wi-Fi? And clearly, all the things I learned in my 20s, 30s, 40s, there's a reason why this company didn't have the resources it should have had, right? Like, think about every reason. And it reminded me of a lot of the women and families that you're serving here, right? It's the same story. It's the same, all these memories from childhood, as much as I tried to gloss over it. It was really hard for our family, right? And my parents said, don't worry. I'm like, but I saw it. Like, there was always this ambient stress. They said, maybe we won't make it. We have to go back. And anytime my dad got sick, he would say, if I don't get better, what's going to happen to my wife and these 3 dum-dums? Where they can't even go back to Korea. That stress I saw here, and that was August 2013. And for 6 months, I relived basically my parents' life. I was an immigrant into this community. I didn't know all the answers. I was alone. And I thought to myself, like, it's almost like reliving their life, but now with some of the knowledge of the systems in this country that I had accumulated in my 20s, 30s, and 40s. and the context that I had, I said, what happens if we were to reimagine this completely? Why don't we build a new world? I'm going to help these ladies build a world called Ashley Stewart, and I'm going to ask this financial system to change 5%, the legal system to change 5%. We're going to bend all of the systems. No wonder that these systems are not geared. Like, we have to gear it so that these women can be. They can be themselves, be their best selves, and we're going to make the systems bend, not them. And I always thought about my mom. My mom always said, oh, it's my fault. She blamed herself a lot. And these days I teach at MIT, and it's like the systems bend people. Right? And I'm like, Mom, it's not you. It's all designed for you to not feel good, to not be successful, right? And that's what we did. So for 6 months, I fought the systems that my parents wanted me so badly to be part of, right? I said, you can't do this here. I won't let you. And so we designed something new. And these ladies, I went around the country and said, my name is James. Remember, there was no video technology, no Wi-Fi. So I walked into every Southside Chicago, Philadelphia, said, I'm James. And they looked at me and they said, huh. And I just said, this is who I am. Like, help me. Help me help you. And to this day, I mean, one of the things I'm most appreciative of this experience, because people often talk about it, how I went in and helped, save the company. It's not. I unleashed what was already in these ladies. I just helped them build a system that actually recognized it. I didn't change anything. It's there, right? What I did well is that I helped her sing her song really clearly, and I would not let her change her tone for anyone. And then I set up all the math and the numbers behind it to support it. That's what I think I did well. And I think what I got out of it, they saw me clearly. They said, James, we don't care about your pedigree, your finance. You have like the biggest heart ever. Like, you love us. You love people. And I said, yeah, and this is for the Korean dudes in the audience. They're like, you love people. And I said, yeah, is that bad? Like, to show emotion, to like show love and kindness. And they're like, no, you have so much soul. And I said, I do. I've been holding it in for so long because it wasn't really accepted, right? They're like, oh, you're smart. I was like, I don't want to be smart. So on a Morgan Stanley podcast I did, they said, what do you want to be known for? I said, I want to be my legacy. Like, people say, oh, that James guy, he's generous. And that's what we did. So after 6 months, that's what we built. And I want you to know, and this is where it's sad, I was supposed to go home, and I went begging. I begged for money for this company to adapt this plan and to execute it. I wanted to go home. I was away from my family, and I missed my friends and my identity, and no one came. Not one person gave me a penny. And I know a lot of people in finance around the world, we got rejected by everybody. And I came home, my wife said, what is going on? And I just said, I can't. It was for me, my dad's even worse now, and I failed. The one thing I thought I could deliver to the ladies was money. I couldn't do it. And maybe in retrospect, part of it was that they weren't expecting this person, like the outside world, to be CEO of a fashion company for black women. They couldn't get over it. They kept saying, oh, what do you know? I'm like, I don't know. There's a lot of common humanity here, don't you think? No, we don't see that. You're a private equity guy. So I had another gut check after 6 months. I knew I was right here. And this is important, like generosity unliberated, it has to also, you can't give you can't give to the point of enervating yourself, right? The math was right, too, right? The ops were right, too. And so I stayed. I called in some favors, I raised some money, and we purchased the company. I ended up being CEO for another 6.5 years. So for 7 years, we did this, and we built something pretty special. I mean, we built a world. This is the bottom row. It's a community. That's your community movement, right? This is the bottom left picture is the picture in the TED Talk of us giving our last assets, we gave it away. We're like, we're done. And from there, we built over time inroads into the NRF board, finance, that's the CEO of Price Waterhouse, CEO of Salesforce and Facebook, and all the celebrities came. We built a big media company to amplify the message of what we built. But we amplified and we grew the bottom left-hand corner picture. It was the feeling of generosity when no one else believed in us. Our little team, the ladies and me and a few friends that came, we knew we were right. We knew that was right. And so, yeah, were there moments of doubt when I said, you know, this is crazy? Because my parents, you have to understand too, like, they were worried for me. And I kept saying, I said, Dad, Mom, this is you. Like, we've operationalized on scale your values, right? Where capital is not just financial capital, it's social capital. Where generosity and kindness, why can't you say that at work? I don't understand that, right? Balance sheet, balance. All these Korean things started coming out. Ge, like all of the customs, I operationalized Ge into the financial plans. Like we had shared assets. So all of these communal, collective type operational ways that my parents survived, we put it into the plan on scale. And we augmented it with capital. This is something that generosity also, you talk about an MIT, most things in life are closed loops. You do it, you're done. It creates equilibrium. Like you fill up the beer, you drink it, it's over. There are very few things in nature that compound forever, right? Because then you would have lack of equilibrium in nature, right? Like it would be chaos. Money compounds forever. That's why wealth, if you don't use it right, it's not harmonious. It creates imbalance. It shouldn't compound forever. Things aren't meant to do that. Love compounds forever. Generosity compounds forever. So my theory in Ashley Stewart was, what happens if I align two positive feedback loops? Money, kindness. And if we set up the entire ops of the company to augment those two things, what would happen? And that's what we ended up doing. The ripples kept going, right? And so in the meantime, all of the race relationships, right? I was invited to join a board at JP Morgan Chase that was reinventing about how they were thinking about mortgages in this country with two secretaries of state. And they're like, JP Morgan said, we have a lot to learn from this little company. And it meant a lot to me. There were a lot of tears when you do things and like people call and they say, oh, like, and you get recognition, but you're not asking for it. We just did it. And these things keep expanding, right? So generosity, people want to expand. So I'm spending a lot of time talking to big companies, seeding small companies. That's Constance Wu at the Oscars laughing at me and saying, your life is a mess, right? And I'm now chairing entrepreneurship at Howard University. I got a call last year to do that, and I cried. When the president called me, I just said, are you sure? And I started to cry. There's just so much more similarity between Black communities and Korean communities than we talk about. And I think that both cultures have so much joy and suffering and so much communal responsibility toward like accountability and the concept of shame, like good shame. I really hope that the two communities work together more. I really want to be part of that. So this is what I'm doing now. After 7 years, by the way, I don't like to talk about it, but generosity is also, it's not just good, it's not good for you, not just good for you, it's good. It's also, I want to change the vocabulary. It creates scale. It's very profitable. Our company was very successful financially. After the entire world said no, within 2 years, our company had a valuation that was like multiple 9 figures. And so I usually don't talk about that, but I want to talk about that here, right? Generosity is profitable. And if we create profit for and positive externalities, we should be okay talking about profit, so long as people are sharing in it equitably, and it's not just for one person. So this is me. So what I'm doing now, this is a story I'm going to tell you that some of you know from the TED. And if I'm going too long, you can give me the cutoff. After 7 years, I really reconciled a lot of things about myself, about my Korean heritage, my parents. My dad died basically the first year of Ashley Stewart. My mom died the last. And I was tired. And what got me through it was that at both of the funerals, I want you to know how many black women came and sent flowers to my dad's funeral and my mom's funeral. My dad's funeral, I didn't tell anyone that my dad died. And I said this on the Brene Brown podcast, but I was still not fully there in terms of being in the right place, even though I was being generous and generous. I wasn't being generous to myself. And I was taking on too much, so I didn't tell anyone my dad died. And the same week, my youngest daughter almost died in a camp accident. And so I was sort of looking upstairs and saying, why are you doing this to me? I got so much going on. And so I said to my assistant, I just need a week off. And you have to picture this scene where when my dad died, my mom's in her hanbok, and I'm standing there next to her. My entire childhood of my dad's friends are coming in. All the Korean immigrants that came in 66, 67. They're all wearing the same plaid jacket. You know what plaid jacket I'm talking about? They're all wearing the same jacket. And they're all sort of patting me on the head and say, you got older, or, like, or, they always say, you gained, like, whatever. And, it's the same things that are happening, right? And in came my whole company, which was sort of the United Colors of Benetton anyway. And I was moved, but what happened was that the ladies from the stores came. So you have to picture black women working in retail in Newark, East Orange, Trenton, Union. They came together in carpool and they walked in awkwardly because they didn't know if they were welcome at my dad's funeral, and they came up to my mom and said, Mrs. Rhee, we just want you to know we think you did a good job raising your son. And then they came up to me and they held my hand, and this woman, Cherry, she said, James, you didn't tell anyone. And I said, no, I didn't tell anyone. They said, you didn't think we'd find out and be here for you. And I cried in front of the entire company. I just sobbed. Because my whole life was sitting right there. My mother, right? These ladies, my dad's friends. And I just said, and after that moment, I just became a different person, actually. Like, I asked for help more, right? I was the pride of, like, I asked for help. Like, help me. I need help. So all those friends you saw in that picture in the world that I built, please help us. We're doing a good thing, like, help. I changed. And I just got to a place where I just feel like I don't have any shame anymore. And I'm really living my life very openly. I want, love first way in any context. And that doesn't make me any less good at math. So this story, I'm going to end this with here, because I'm going a little bit long. So this is what I'm building now. I'm building a world. That's me, 5 years old, kindergarten. Some of you who saw the TED, that's me, what I'm talking about to open up the TED. They stuck me in the back left corner, which was sort of what happened actually as I was growing up. I used to get stuck into the back left corner often. And the kid standing in front of me, that's the boy that I would share. So the story, and I'm going to end this, is that I came home from school, from kindergarten, with a toy red helicopter, and my parents thought I had stolen it, or we didn't have a lot of toys. And so they said, yeah, come here. You know, Korean, they're very Socratic parents. So I was standing there like, why do you have this toy? And inside I'm like, I'm 5 years old, like, I don't know all the answers, but I was like, they just gave it to me. A family came in to give it to me, and they kept badgering me. I didn't know the answer, and they said, we are sorry. We accused you of stealing it, and we didn't know in America, like, all families come in to give toys to 5-year-olds. And I said, no, you didn't screw up. I'm the only one who got one. And they said, oh, like we were worried because you're never going to fit in here because your parents don't know the customs. And I said, no, Mom, you didn't screw up this time, right? And they said, why do you think they gave it to you? I said, I don't know. And they got, my dad got a little irritated, actually. He was like, why don't you know? Why? And this is such a quintessentially Korean, I didn't say this on the TED because it's such a Korean interaction, what I'm describing. And anyway, a few months later, they found out that I had been sharing half my lunch with that boy with the denim jacket in front of me. And they said, why did you do that? And I just said, he never had lunch. And then I thought I was in trouble because we didn't have a lot of money, and maybe I'm not supposed to share my food. And my dad got very emotional. He just said, you think I'm mad at you? I never forgot it. And he got he's like, no matter how little we have, we will live a life as much as we can in abundance. Like there's always enough to share. And that's the best part of Korean culture, right? There's always enough. And my grandmother did it during the Korean War. My mother lost her dad during the Korean War. My grandmother raised 4 kids without a husband after the Korean War. My grandmother was illiterate. And you can tell, like these ladies at Ashley Stewart, they reminded me of my grandmother and my mother. That's why I'm calling it Red Helicopter. Because I never want to forget to have an abundant spirit. There's always enough. And I'm busy building systems that sort of reward people who create that sort of mindset. And my job is really to shed light on organizations like this and entrepreneurs like this who want to live that way. So anyway, that's it. That's I think I did a decent job. I was a little bit like this, but like.
I want to just point out that you too can ask questions. Just go on the Whova app, and I'll keep an eye on it. But I took a picture of the quote because I want to sort of follow up on this idea of, you were praised by Patty Sellers on the community building that you did, and knowing how to build a strong community within what you were doing. Also, this idea of using goodwill as an asset,
yes.
Right?
And so one of the things that happens is that, we grow up, we know what goodwill is, right? It's all the things this is goodwill. It's all the little interactions, it's very human, and it's usually not talk, it is behavior. Goodwill in finance, some of you, I heard a lot of Goldman Sachs references this morning, right? So goodwill is a plug. In business, goodwill is a random item on a balance sheet that you literally use it to plug a balance sheet so you can go home because the model doesn't balance without it. I'm serious. Like, ask your finance friends if you're not a finance person. It's literally a throwaway thing that doesn't get measured. And to me, that represents in such a crystal way why people are sometimes we are priming people to behave in the exact opposite way in finance, in the way that you want to raise your kids. It creates a lot of cognitive dissonance. And you're seeing it over the last 2 years, So I said, well, at Ashley Stewart, I'm going to measure goodwill. Why wouldn't I? Well, you're not allowed to do that because the accounting rules say you can't do that. Okay, I'll report it correctly, but I'm going to prime everyone's behavior in this company to increase goodwill, and I'm going to measure it. And so they're little things, right? Like workers' compensation became a collective asset. We broke every actuarial table that the actuaries have ever had. It declined 99% per year. Our premiums went down like 50%. And then I took that money as a collective asset. It's like, I paid it out to the employees and said, you earned it with your behavior. And I stressed it every day. It's your behavior, and I'm going to reward you for it. Not one day, a longitudinally consistent behavior. I changed the entire compensation system. The highest bonus systems were given to your non-revenue generating behavior. Your hiring, your mentoring, your retention of your talent. I knew what their sales were. There was a separate, smaller bonus for that. So if you think about it, we changed from measurements that were transactional in nature, the things that shouldn't be transactional in nature, we rewarded differently, right? We really incentivized non-transactional behavior. And it kept spreading. I said it once, I acted that way, and then all the numbers and all the tech, it reinforced it. We had to undo some of the vectors because some of the technology is built to prime a certain behavior. So we had to customize the software to do it backwards. And so lo and behold, what happened is we looked up after a couple years and I just said, oh my gosh, that's about when my dad died. And so when the ladies came to my funeral, I said, oh, I think it's working. Right? That's what we did. So that's how we measured goodwill. We said, screw accounting. We're going to bring in real life metrics into our professional lives.
So much of what KACF does is to center on the community and build the community. In what ways were you able to do that? Maybe not just even at Ashley Stewart, but in other sectors.
I've increasingly been reading a lot of Buddhist texts, so what am I saying about what I did well is I helped give permission and a safe environment to unleash everyone's leadership. So I think the key here is that this was not a top-down movement build. I stood in a corner with pom-poms and said, you got this. I see it. It's the same conversation I had with my mom at the kitchen table when she had a bad day and she was crying because someone made fun of her accent. They couldn't understand her at the hardware store. And I'm saying, Mom, this is not you. It's them. And so it was that. The community building was me looking at the ladies and saying, my job is to just support you and convince you it is safe to do you. And it built. And so it leads to a different organizational style too. It's in MIT, and this new highly distributed decision-making model. There's another way to say it in real talk. You lead yourself first. You have to lead yourself first, and you have to give people the power and the confidence to realize they can lead their life themselves.
I know that you're still involved in investing and whatever. Clearly you invest your money philanthropically. What are your, thoughts in the ways in which you give and the ways in which you think through giving?
This goes back to the hot mess comment. So I think in terms of music. Music is a really natural systems dynamics way to think, right? Everything's connected, there's no waste. So I think like that. So every action I do or situation I analyze, it's always longitudinally long. And I think about all the 50 connective points that everything will have, and I press a button. So that's how I'm arranging my life, right? So teaching at Howard has 20x magnifiers, right? I'm Korean. I'm teaching at Howard. I chair entrepreneurship at Howard. I don't say that publicly and saying, I think I'm the first Korean American entrepreneurship chair at Howard University. It's obvious. But then I think about all the ways that could impact things. So it's never one transaction. I force rank the amplification effects of each action and saying, if I do this, there are 30 flywheels it will spin. Let's do that. And then it leads to the question you just asked me, where I then call each flywheel and I'm saying, you got it. And let me introduce you. So it creates these new causal relationships that generally don't exist. MIT is, MIT, it's also really Asian. I don't say that very publicly either, but if you think about why and how and what I'm doing, oh, how cool. Do you think that MIT and Howard could work together to do systems change in this country? and maybe I can help bridge those relationships because I'm friends with both, that's exactly what I'm doing. I just don't say it. And so that's why I appreciate being able to say it here, because sometimes it's lonely. It's lonely sometimes. I'm like, and
when Cathy said earlier in the first panel that, you know, giving to your alma mater and giving to the opera, those are great ways of giving, but in many ways it's a white model, right? We both kind of doubled over in laughter. What would your model be like? How would you describe your model?
I think I'm turning 52 in February. I think as much as my parents wanted me to not be as Korean as, I think I'm pretty Korean. I really think I am. I'm really proud of it. You know, like I think I was more proud to be Korean at times than my parents were about me being Korean. Does that make sense? They really, for my own good. It is a community-owned life I lead. Like my actions I feel like are owned by others. So I'm very intentional about things. There's nothing that I'm doing in vacuum. I constantly look at other definitions of the stuff. I unlearned what I learned in my 20s and 30s. I'm more like I was when I was 5 years old. Like I really feel very free right now. Like I can take a purple crayon. I talk about Harold and the purple crayon all the time. And I'm just drawing. Not in a spreadsheet, not in like wireframes. I'm literally taking crayons saying, why can't I draw a world like this? And I'm asking people, are you seeing what I'm drawing? And that's the type of life I'm living. It's an oxymoron. I feel very detached, but really attached.
I have a question coming in on Huva. That's what it is. Oh my God. I've got it open in front of me and I still can't say it. In a world that's so broken, where folks don't embrace perhaps your brand of generosity, kindness, goodwill, what gives you hope? What sustains you in this?
Particularly young people. I think I've taught at 40 colleges in the last year and a half. Think about what I'm doing. What we did at Ashley Stewart, it was cool. And now, the last year and a half, I said, well, what good is that if I can't teach it? So that's why I'm teaching. It's forcing me to put it in a curriculum and hot wiring together neuropsych with philosophy and finance theory and saying, let me explain to you what the word leverage is. I'm betting on young people. I've been betting, 10 years ago, I said very publicly, I'm really, sorry fellas, I'm long women. In every way, I'm long women, I'm long people of color, and where they intersect, I'm super long. That's what I'm long, and that's what I'm doing.
That's finance speak for investing long term.
I'm betting. I'm making bets on that and just being.
I'm just being your interpreter.
Thank you.
Okay, raise of hands for those who don't want to use Huva. Yes. Should we get a microphone to you?
You are very inspiring. I'm your mother's generation. I came 1969. I went through a lot. What I hear from you is quite moving. Because I come here 53 years ago. I remember how we live, how other people live. Now, my children's generation, the way you think, where you embrace women, I'm a woman's advocate. Where you embrace women, where you embrace black people, especially we are benefited by the black people. I really admire. Second one, and your teaching is very important. How you gonna financial independence bring the independence of their well-being, whether you are colored or a minority. So it will be nice to share your story with people of minority, especially like us. Will be very inspiring to a lot of us. I'm learning a lot from you.
Thank you for my mom.
Oh, can I just say one thing? I'm just really glad I didn't wear mascara today. One. And two, you know, my family came in 1969 as well. I was 4 years old at the time. And I think that's what unites all of our generations, because we see that struggle, we felt that struggle, we know what that's like. And I think somebody on stage, maybe it was Kyung, knows that we're here because of the sacrifices of that generation, and that it's the younger generation's duty on some level to operationalize all the things that we've learned and that have been done. So I'm curious your response to that inquiry.
Thank you. I mean, it's, yeah, I really miss my mom. My mom died very suddenly 2 years ago. It was 1 month diagnosis, death, pancreatic cancer. And so I basically like slept next to her for the whole time. And I realized about my mom, as much as I was worried that there were times that she lost herself in this country, you know, like sometimes I'm like, is she living through me too much? Talks about me. Like, we used to argue about it. I'm like, Mom, come on. But when I look back, and I told her this, she used to cry during the Ashley Stewart, like anytime there was a podcast or something, because she's like, she would cry. And so my dad never saw any of this. My mom did. And she's like, it's for me, right? That's me. And I'm like, it's you. Mom, you've always been the best leader I've ever met. And anytime I teach at like McKinsey or anything, I'm like, you're just listening to my mother. It's coming out of my mouth. And so, you know, she was a great leader. She never lost herself. You know, that woman, my mom, thought she couldn't speak English at all, but she went back and renewed her nursing degree when she was 55 years old in English, and then worked for 10 years at a veterans home on Long Island to take care of the American soldiers who saved her country, and said she wanted to do that. So also she could earn health insurance that took care of my dad's Parkinson's. So I always used to say to her, Mom, who's taking care of whom? Because she always looked at herself as small. I'm like, Mom, look what you're doing. So I would say that to you. Like, I'm like, what you...
Oh, there's more Kleenex being passed out on the side. But again, you know, it's what unites our room. We all understand that feeling. Oh my God, there's so much Kleenex for us.
I'm sorry.
And again, they're happy tears of understanding and recognition and shared struggle. I would love to hear more from the audience. Is there another question? I don't see one on the app. Don't be shy. One of the things I would love to, you could expand on Red Helicopter if you want, right? Yeah. I mean, the idea that you've turned this into a multi-platform media, let's see. But before you answer that question, let me hear from the audience, because I do want to hear the questions, yes. Because we're like down to the last 5 minutes.
James, thank you so much. This was incredible. At our lunch today, you mentioned when you're thinking about playing piano and how your left hand and your right hand are interacting, and how you think, and you mentioned it a little bit in the talk. How do you impart that to people without necessarily explaining it to somebody who hasn't taken piano lessons before, and how you apply that thinking into your approach to business and life?
So this is what I'm working on with Red Helicopter. If you think about it, it's kind of a new pedagogy. So I've been testing it at high schools, colleges, private equity firms, McKinsey. Like, can I teach things? So like with music, what we talked about it, this is going to sound corny. So I played violin, surprising. You're laughing. Kyung liked that one. But my brother and sister played piano, and so when you study like Bach and when they were playing inventions, and he wrote it in counterpoint, right? Right hand melody, left hand melody. Together it sounded better. And I really have tried to think about that from not-for-profit, for-profit. Korean, American, whatever this means, American, right? I know it means more than that, but just, it's being able to play multiple melodies, but always with the goal that if you fuse them, it should sound beautiful. Never, not one dominant hand. This one, it's not just harmony. It's a separate melody. And so even like Ashley Stewart, I think, as I said, did a really good job letting these ladies sing their song. Their song. And I just said, but while that happened, I guess what happened is that they let me sing mine, and the two voices sounded really good together. And I think that's what the world reacted to and said, oh, it's beautiful, but it's not forced.
Right.
It's different.
There's somebody with the microphone. This may have to be the last question, so go ahead.
And by the way, I'm sorry, I'm lingering. I booked an 8:50 p.m. flight out tonight. I'm here, so like,
we'll keep you.
I would love to meet all of you,
This will be the
learn about
master
everything
class.
that. No, I want to learn about all the things that you all are doing. But I'm here till 8:50 p.m.
I loved my little breakout session, by the way. The young people in nonprofits in my group was really fascinating, too. Go ahead.
So I want to go to the private equity space, and so I love the analogy around the music and the vision.
Yep.
I'm not so optimistic that the private equity space shares that. Well, I know they don't share it now. I'm a little skeptical about how quickly they may, come to that.
Yes.
But I am wondering, like, what do you think? Is there potential for there to be a growing field of investors to be looking at that and to take that approach? And what do you think it'll take to move the field?
Time, pedagogy. I'm working with these organizations like the accrediting arm of business schools and saying, are you sure you're teaching business school correctly? There's a bunch of books out now, right? The Jack Welch book and McKinsey book. Are you sure that we're proud of the record from the last 40 years? I'm asking these questions and saying, what happens if I said there was another way? What happens if you taught future value calculations and did it through case studies that was solely on the pink tax and proved that women should actually be asking for more than parity? Right? Because you can do the math. If you teach the finance and teach the, quote, left side brain stuff in justice terms, that's not prescriptive. It's just like, look at the numbers. Women have to save X amount more from retirement. Shouldn't they make more then? How do you deny that math? So I'm teaching these things through these type of narratives. And so my theory is that, again, this is now neuroscience. There was a young lady from Columbia in neuroscience. You know that the memories are made, it's hippocampus, insula, amygdala to the prefrontal at night. So if you can form real memories through music with these narratives, that's what you remember. So I tease my MIT and Howard students or the Stanford kids I teach or McKinsey, I'm like, every time you think of this, you're going to remember this story, and you're going to think twice before using these formulas to do what you're going to do with it. And it's happening. They're like, oh, like we see your face. I'm just asking you to pause. But I'm not trying to change human nature. I mean, human beings are also selfish. We're not going to change that, right? But it's to really just curb some of it, a little bit more. So I think it's going to take time. There are more impact funds than I think that we can talk. They're more growing. And I hope that, I forget the name, is it Eunice?
Eunice.
Like companies like that. I hope there are 1,000 of those companies. And
So
the
well
more,
thought out.
Yeah, the more narratives that help and say, listen, look, this is another success story. And I don't want to oversell Ashley Stewart. It's not like we built Amazon. we didn't build Facebook, but when I think about success, there was a comment about that earlier. I'm very proud of what we did. And you know, and I get to be able to tell that story now. I almost didn't. We talked about this, right? Because I almost, after my mom died, I really just went into a 6 to 9 month I needed a break. I really had to breathe. And it was predominantly black women who called me and said, we miss your voice. Like, speak. And so I'm starting to climb out of the hole right now and say, well, and I'm sort of like, it's a very Korean, like imposter syndrome-ish. I'm kind of like, you sure? So the TED thing was my first.
Oh, we're sure, James.
The TED thing was my first. You know, I said, fine, I'll do it. So I did a TED talk and I did this. I'm like, oh, they like it. That's, I'm like, so I'm building on that. So what Red Helicopter is just, I think the best way to think about it, and you have to really suspend disbelief. Like it doesn't exist. Think about it like I'm operationalizing Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. On scale, but slightly older, adolescents, young adults, I'm teaching them kindness and finance and all of these things and saying, what do you think? I'm building a community that gives permission for leaders who want to lead a certain way to lead that way. And there's a big media component to it, right? There's a book coming and potentially there's talk about making this story into a feature-length movie. So kind of like Remember the Titans and that. In the beginning, 5 years ago, I knew it was sort of coming, and I used to joke in LA, I'm like, oh, I know, you wish I were a little bit taller and wider.
In the Harvard picture, was the guy sitting next to you Matt Damon?
Yeah.
Yeah, looked like it, yeah.
So Matt wrote Good Will Hunting our senior year, and
underachiever, yeah.
Yeah, but think about it, he quit, he left Harvard.
Yeah.
And so when the TED came out, we emailed back and forth, and the insinuation was like, you couldn't think of a better topic than goodwill? Like real original, James,
I hate to be the one who closes this out, but I first of all, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for joining us on stage. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And just on the topic of Mr. Rogers, I interviewed Mrs. Rogers when the movie came out, and she talked about how kindness is a muscle too, and that Mr. Rogers spent his life flexing that muscle and acting out. And that's why she wanted her husband not to be portrayed as a saint in the movie. Because she said, my husband wasn't a saint. He had to work at being kind. And I thought that was such a lovely tie-in to what we were saying this morning, that you have to flex that muscle of giving, you have to flex that muscle of kindness. I'm so thrilled that you're all here and meeting each other and networking, and continue to drink from the well of James Rhee's wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kwang-hee 선생님, for your insights, and of course to James, to Juju, to Cathy and Rhea, to Marie Myung-Ok-Lee, Sebastian, also Eunice, Byun, who had to leave early, and all of your voices and the questions, the conversations we've been able to have. This is why Korean American Community Foundation exists, to set this table for us to have these conversations that most of us did not have really growing up, right? Like I noticed with like a lot of my friends, white friends, Jewish friends in New York, I noticed that they actually did grow up having sometimes these kinds of dinner time conversations. And yet here we are, we have a desire, we have some capacity, we have interest, and we're kind of helping each other to get the thinking, get the language, to kind of workshop some of this together, and just to grapple with what does reimagining philanthropy look like. And so we are thrilled that we could be at this table together with all of you. And we look forward to continuing the conversation in so many ways and just deepening it. I want to just say that for those of you, you're all going to be so fortunate as to get the goodie bags as you're leaving with Marie Myung-Ok-Lee's new book from Simon & Schuster called The Evening Hero that centers a Korean-American story. She is available to sign your book as you leave, and also you're going to get a treat from Material Kitchen as well. And even though Sebastian had nothing to put in the goodie bag, we love him anyway. Thank you so much, and take care.